The Fate of Austria. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 76 Success. A Grand Duke who is likely to inherit the throne usually has 3 attendants, one responsible for security, one responsible for financial management, and one responsible for daily life and food. Completely different from tutors. People who can become valets are usually those with noble status and outstanding abilities. This ability can be one's own ability, or it can be the strength of the family, but what is certain is that a person without strength or background will never become an attendant to the heir to the throne. This Miss Jenny is said to be the daughter of an exiled French nobleman, but looking at the way she is tired of dealing with those attentive little nobles, you know that her life is not very good. After all, a person with status, the lady will explicitly reject some people she doesn't like. The nobles of this era not only valued status, but also valued wealth. Beauty was the least of their concerns. At the same time, the moral values of the times did not believe that finding a lover was a shameful thing. Instead, they believed that a man without a lover was not a successful man. Although Miss Jenny has countless fans around her, the people who propose to her are all small nobles, not big nobles, because the latter's marriages usually have nothing to do with love, but are only linked to interests. As for Jenny's beauty, what use is it to a child? These nobles even suspected that Archbishop Franz would wipe his nose with her beautiful dress. Moreover, Archduke Franz looked dull and barely spoke, even though he was 6 years old. It was very likely that he had inherited the mental illness in his parents' family. As for those professors who claimed that Archduke Franz had extraordinary wisdom, they were completely a bunch of liars in the eyes of the nobles. Did they know this from birth? Don't want to work, but still want to get paid? Beautiful thought. No wonder he was thrown into the street by the royal family. The Habsburg family is prone to idiots, and the Wittelsbach family is full of lunatics. This Archduke Franz is probably not normal either. In fact, Franz just doesn't like this kind of occasion. At the same time, Mrs. Sophie also asked Franz to be careful in his words and deeds. After all, everything he says and does represents the royal family. Afterwards, Mrs. Sophie's series of actions completely exceeded Franz's cognition. He was not sure what his mother was going to do. If it is just to learn social etiquette, then it is enough. Why bring this woman of unknown origin back home and give her a heavy responsibility? In fact, Franz once considered appointing Talia as his maid when he grew older, but Franz soon discovered that it was impossible. Thalia's family is considered a prominent family in Bohemia, but she has been expelled from the family. But even without this incident, she would not be qualified to serve as Franz's attendant. Her university degree is not recognized. For women, the only thing that can be recognized as qualifications, and in the court for generations, Habsburg, there are many nobles working for the family. The Jenny in front of her is just an exiled French nobleman, and I'm afraid that this identity is all fake. Franz once asked Talia to investigate the affairs of the Polish Nationalist Army, and this Jenny seemed to be one of the leaders of the Polish Nationalist Army. There were even rumors that she planned the murder in Frankfurt. Let's not talk about her unknown identity. Let's just say that she has been in Vienna for less than a year. I'm afraid she won't be able to find her way to the palace. It would be okay if she was just a socialite. Otherwise, with the leaky intelligence organization she established, she should be pulled out and shot for 10 minutes. Your Majesty Prime Minister, this Miss Jenny is your guest, so can you be her introducer, Mrs. Sophie threw the pot to Metternich when she opened her mouth. At the same time, she also gave Jenny a big background, that is, Prince Metternich's people. It's just that Prince Metternich is a little difficult to deal with. He knows Jenny's identity, but it's hard to do it here. If he sends a Polish rebel leader to the palace, if something happens, it will definitely be a big pot. But if she refuses, then Mrs. Sophie's character will definitely get to the bottom of it. In this way, it will be a matter of time for Jenny's identity to be exposed. As the Prime Minister of the Austrian Empire, she has an unclear relationship with the leader of the Polish Restoration Army. I'm afraid there's no way to escape the relationship. At this time, Count Korolov decided to add insult to injury. Miss Ajani, you are a frequent visitor to the Prime Minister's ball. We even danced together. Prince Metternich's face was very ugly. He knew that Korolov wanted to kill him. Count Korolov, you are here too. Good evening, Madam Sophie. You are always so dazzling. Count Korolov stepped forward and kissed his hands, and then looked at Franz. Good evening, Archduke Franz. Good evening, Count Korolov. At this time, Mrs. Sophie continued to speak. Count Korolov, you have met Miss Ajani more than once at Prince Metternich's ball, and you have also danced with her. You must be very familiar with her. Count Korolov said subconsciously. Yes, a beauty like Miss Ajani. Even the Prime Minister, Korolov, realized that something was wrong, but Mrs. Sophie did not give him a chance to change his story. Oh, then I guess I can write your name on the name of the other recommender. The stone that Count Korolov lifted eventually hit him. Metternich and Count Korolov looked at each other and wanted to strangle each other to death. Now there is no problem with Ajani's identity. After all, there are two most powerful people in the Imperial government as guarantees. Who dares to question it? However, Prince Metternich and Count Korolov both made up their minds to ask people to kill the Polish Restoration Army when they went out, so as to cut off her contact and prevent Ajani from doing anything in the palace. Ajani is still hesitating whether to accept Mrs. Sophie's invitation. After all, everything is too sudden and looks like a trap, but she should not have a better opportunity than this, and no matter how vicious a woman is, she will not take her own. Let the kids be the bait. Mrs. Sophie's words refreshed Franz's understanding of unreasonableness. Of course, I also gained a new understanding of this mother who loves to listen to stories. Madam Sophie lifted Ajani's chin with her fan. What are you still hesitating about? My dear, this made Ajani shudder. Does Mrs. Sophie have that kind of hobby? All this makes sense, and Ajani sighed in her heart. She obviously wanted to get close to Archduke Franz Karol, but now it seems. Thank you, Madam Sophie. I would like to accept this position. That's great. This little guy has always wanted to be close to you. Ajani knelt down and looked at the child in front of her carefully. Hello, my name is Ajani. Archduke Franz. I will be your attendant from now on. Hello, Miss Ajani. Mrs. Sophie opened the fan in her hand and covered her mouth. Miss Ajani, from now on you will be responsible for Franz's daily life. Starting from coaxing him to sleep. It will be difficult to coax him. Please don't worry. I'll take care of it. Ajani bowed respectfully and sent Mrs. Sophie away. Thalia was very excited to learn that she was going to work with Ajani. If she had a tail, it might be broken by now. Madam Sophie walked into the corridor, and Colonel Schussel followed immediately. Go tell those silly girls from Poland that their leader has betrayed them, and now they can choose to be loyal to me, or feed the fish in the Danube. Thanks to Zyanatang 246, Zeus, the godlike CR7 for their monthly votes, and all the readers for their support. The weather has been really hot recently, so I apologize for my confusion. Chapter 77. Genius, idiot, unlucky guy. For such a genius, it took decades for his discovery to be gradually understood, and it would take nearly 100 years for the related inventions to be revealed to people. And his contribution still affects our lives today. Color, ultrasound, radar, and even the theoretical basis of the Big Bang are all based on his discoveries. Unfortunately, he was not taken seriously when he was alive, and he even lived a life of poverty. He was born into a famous stonemason family in Salzburg, Austria. As the eldest son, he was allowed to take over the stonemason's business according to family tradition. However, he did not have the good physique of his father, and he was destined to be unable to engage in the traditional family business. Although he could not inherit the family business, his family was very wealthy. His father hired the best tutor for him, hoping that he could become an artist, but he was more interested in mathematics. In 1822 he was successfully admitted to the Vienna Polytechnic, and in 1825 to the University of Vienna. When his teaching assistant career came to an end in 1833. The University of Vienna did not consider renewing his contract. He had to consider his future. In March 1833, he applied for a teaching position at the Royal University of Prague. He was full of confidence. After all, He had obtained multiple degrees and had many years of experience as a teaching assistant in the imperial capital of Vienna. However, his application letter was like a stone, and there was no news. Anxious and disappointed, he had no choice but to continue his job search. There just happened to be news that the Austrian Imperial Naval Academy in Venice was recruiting teachers. He felt that a group of navy bosses would have no reason to reject an outstanding scholar like himself. He rushed to the interview excitedly, but was kicked out because of his thin body. When he left Vienna in 1834, he failed to find a job. He had no choice but to return to his hometown and became an accountant in a textile factory. Keeping accounts in a dark factory is obviously not the life he wants. His younger brother inherited the family business, learned about his elder brother's current situation, and offered to pay for his elder brother to go to the United States for development. Although his family was just a stonemason family, the person who lived next door to Mozart was definitely a rich man. Soon, he received a large sum of money, which was enough for him to leave the Austrian Empire and go to the United States across the ocean. At the same time, he also received 2 invitation letters, one from Bern and one from Prague, both inviting him to be a middle school teacher. He chose Prague, which was relatively nearby, and he deliberately learned Czech for this purpose. However, on the first day he arrived in Prague, he discovered that everyone here spoke German. He married the daughter of a local goldsmith, but they did not live happily after their marriage. The goldsmith's daughter quickly spent all his money, so she often left him and his daughter at home and returned home alone. Natal family. In anger, he took his daughter and went to Vienna to find a job. Of course, his luck was still as bad as before. He went to several universities in Vienna, but was always rejected. When he only had 2 kreuts left in his pocket, he was kicked out by the hotel owner. Unfortunately, his daughter had a high fever again. He could only shamelessly go to the Royal Academy of Vienna to try his luck, but the other party had no intention of meeting this commoner without a title. The gatekeeper, who was fat and full of cavities, pushed him out of the door. He was still holding his daughter when he accidentally fell to the ground, but he still begged, "Please, have mercy, for God's sake, let me see counterfeit. My daughter is sick, and I need a job." The gatekeeper spat on the ground. There are tens of thousands of college students in Vienna. Who doesn't want to work at the Royal Academy? You, a country bumpkin who doesn't even have a noble status. Are you worthy? He hugged the gatekeeper's thigh and begged, "Sir, please do me a favor. I'm still a mason and I can help you." The gatekeeper hesitated and asked, "What do you know?" He answered without thinking, "I can carve tombstones." The gatekeeper was furious and kicked him. There were many well-dressed gentlemen around. They didn't even stop to look at the beaten man. They just talked and left as if nothing happened. While protecting the daughter in his arms, he was hit on the head and fell down the steps. Fortunately, he was caught in time. "What's going on? If I read correctly, you are beating a gentleman with his daughter. When did the Royal Academy of Vienna become an unregulated place?" A child said, very unhappy. "Where did you come from, little brat? Just stay here. Are you the illegitimate son of this poor man?" The gatekeeper said mockingly. As soon as the gatekeeper finished speaking, several figures came to his side. 2 tall imperial guards held him down, and a man who looked like an officer began to slap the gatekeeper involuntarily. The officer was tall and strong, and his arm strength was even more amazing. He knocked out 2 of the gatekeeper's teeth with just one slap, and slapped the gatekeeper's face until it looked like a pig's head. Seeing that it was the Forbidden Army who beat the person, the gatekeeper immediately begged the Forbidden Army officer for mercy. Please let me go, sir. I didn't mean to offend you. My words are dirty, and my blood is even dirtier. Don't dirty your hands. Ouch." The gatekeeper lost his teeth, so his words were leaky, but you can still hear the carelessness. The Forbidden Army officer shook his head and turned his head to look at the young man. At this time, the gatekeeper realized that the young man was not an illegitimate child, and that the person leading the Imperial Army could only be a member of the royal family, and he immediately wanted to die. Insulting the royal family. This is the Austrian Empire, not France. In France, Philip could insult the royal family arbitrarily and only pay a small fine. Philip, a French painter, became famous for insulting Louis Philippe, and called on all painters in France to insult Louis Philippe. But in Austria, this crime can be big or small. If it can be brought against the emperor, it will probably only be exiled or expelled from Vienna. If he did not make trouble in front of the emperor, he would most likely be lynched by the Forbidden Army. As for the gendarmerie or the secret police, he would probably be worse than death. Just as the gatekeeper was about to speak, the young man said coldly, "I ask you why you don't let this gentleman in. He is a civilian. The gentlemen in the college think he is not worthy of working here, so they won't let him in. I'm just following orders. Please let me go." The young man coughed impatiently, and the officer knowingly slapped the gatekeeper on the face. "You answer whatever the Grand Duke asks." The gatekeeper nodded quickly and did not dare to say any more. "Let me ask you again. Did you beat this gentleman on your own initiative, or were you instigated by others?" The gatekeeper hesitated. I just wanted to drive him away. I didn't think about anything else. Count Fate said he didn't want to see him again, so I just, okay, you can shut up." The young man turned to the Imperial Guards officer. "Mr. Parrish, let him swallow all his teeth. Tell Count Fate that I don't want to visit him today. Let's go to the manor." The boy turned away and walked towards the fallen man, not watching Mr. Parrish's execution. "Sir, if you don't mind, you can come to my manor as a guest. There are the best doctors there who can help you. Thank you. You are such a good person. My name is Christian Doubler and I'm a scholar." The man wearing only a single coat in winter replied. Doubler, isn't this one of the 3 unlucky people in the history of the Austrian Empire? The other 2 are Mendel, the father of heredity, and Tesla, the son of God. The doorman just now actually hit the smartest person in Austria in this era on the head. It was a waste of money. However, the guard was quickly punished. The 2 forbidden soldiers broke open the guard's mouth. Captain Parrish was very skillful and hit him hard with a butt of his rifle. After 3 blows, he added another kick. The 2 Imperial guards tied a cloth band around the guard's mouth and then pulled his body upright. Captain Parrish hit him hard in the stomach with the butt of his rifle. After a few rounds, the guard's eyes rolled up and he lost consciousness. The Imperial guards moved quickly and resolved the battle before the military police arrived. Parrish got on his horse and came to the gendarmerie captain and whispered a few words. The gendarmerie captain naturally understood what he meant. "Don't look at it. Don't look at it. This person is disturbing public order and polluting the public environment. Take him to the gendarmerie." A few military policemen couldn't help but put black hoods on the guard and threw him directly into the military police carriage. Franz invited Doppler into his 6-horse carriage and asked him what happened and the reason for his coming to Vienna. Temporarily prepared food was being heated on the incubator, and Doppler's little daughter also recovered under Thalia's care. The little girl is not sick, she is just hungry and has no energy. In addition, children have a fast metabolism, which lowers blood sugar and causes panic, sweating, and body heat. The little girl stared at the soup in the pot, with many crumbs stuck to the corners of her mouth, and she was still holding half a steak in her hand. Doppler on the side saw that his daughter was getting better, and his nervous heart was relieved, and he swallowed unconsciously when he saw the food. "Mr. Doppler, if you don't mind, you can eat some too," Franz said with a smile. "That's so embarrassing. I'm not hungry." Doubler said he wasn't hungry, but his stomach growled unsatisfactorily. Thalia on the side also smiled. She liked children very much and sympathized with the father who took care of the children. She rummaged for food in the box beside her. There was only a box of foie gras and a bowl of fish soup left. Thalia looked at Franz, who nodded. Thalia poured the foie gras on the bread and handed it to Doubler, and then placed the fish soup on the warm box to heat. Doubler took the bread and started to eat it without caring about the image. "Mr. Doubler, I would like to hire you as a professor at the Vienna Women's Academy." Doubler almost choked to death, and Thalia almost spit out the juice she just drank. Vienna, Caesar Hotel. There were fragments of fine porcelain all over the floor, and several servants' faces had been smashed with blood, but these people didn't even dare to wipe them for fear of arousing the wrath of the tyrant in front of them. Idiot, you have the nerve to call yourself an economist? let a fool buy the bottom, and I will be better than you, even if I hire a bunch of pigs. Where is my money? Where is my railway? If the Northern Railway is still in my hands, the Austrians will, the Prussians, the French, and the whole of Central Europe all want to see my face. The veins on Solomon Rothschild's forehead popped out. This time Austria's biggest loser was the Rothschild Bank. Solomon Rothschild was the first person in Austria to learn about the collapse of the London stock market. In order to avoid danger and to be able to cut the leaks of the Austrian Empire like Nathan Rothschild, he put his name on the stock market. All the shares were sold to his partners. He had thrown away these hot potatoes, but his loyal partners were not so lucky. Solomon Rothschild's friends went bankrupt one after another, or could only sell their assets at low prices in order not to drown in the financial tsunami. In fact, Solomon Rothschild also suffered considerable losses, conservatively estimated to be around 10 million florins. While his friends lost tens of millions of florins, Solomon Rothschild still remembers that when he first arrived in Vienna, he used the public debt of the Austrian Empire to eliminate the Rothschild family's opponents in Vienna at the time. At the same time, he made a huge profit of 20 million florins, which directly led to the Austrian Empire Charter, the birth of the bank. At that time, Solomon Rothschild almost destroyed Vienna's financial industry, and 1/3 of Vienna's banks went bankrupt. The 700-year-old Gemella declared bankruptcy, and the patriarch of the Parish family, David Parish, who had served the Habsburg family for 15 generations, jumped into the Danube River because of bankruptcy. Later, a 10 million franc bond was issued for Duchess Mary Louisa for a non-existent public project, and Solomon earned 6 million francs. Solomon Rothschild remembered that there was a time when making money in the Austrian Empire was as easy as cheating candy from a child. Why did he suddenly lose money? Compared with the economic losses, Solomon Rothschild's reputation losses were more serious. While transferring risks, Solomon Rothschild successfully killed a large number of long-established banking and financial families. If it hadn't been for Franz's 67 million coinage rescue, the Austrian Empire would have experienced a run on the country as it did in history. And the impact of the economic crisis would have lasted until 1838. With Franz's intervention in this plane, the Austrian Empire not only quickly emerged from the shadow of the economic crisis, but also attracted some foreign investment. Historically, the Austrian Empire did not have close trade relations with Britain and the United States, but it was the country most affected by the economic crisis of 1837 and the entire German Confederation. It must be said that the smart aleck Solomon Rothschild contributed a lot. Solomon Rothschild's misjudgment directly triggered a financial crisis that should not have happened. But in the world of capital where the strong are always strong, Solomon Rothschild eventually became the winner. Not only did he take the opportunity to acquire a large number of excellent assets, he even forced the Habsburg royal family to grant him permission to purchase land in the inner city of Vienna. Jews in the Austrian Empire at this time were not allowed to own land in the inner city of Vienna. Historically, Solomon Rothschild took the opportunity to buy the Caesar Hotel, which he had coveted for a long time. But in this dimension, he was just one of the many tenants of the Caesar Hotel, and at this time, the other tenants downstairs were very unhappy with his mistreatment of porcelain. Along with the sound of the mop hitting the ceiling, a loud sukabil came from downstairs. Chapter 78 The Wrath of Solomon. Solomon Rothschild was so angry that he was usually called King Solomon. But today, not only did some people dare to disobey him, they even dared to scold him in Russian. This is unbearable. Vienna is Solomon's home turf, and this Caesar Hotel is his palace. Historically, Solomon spent money to buy this most expensive hotel in Vienna, and made it his residence. In Solomon's eyes, it was easy to drive a few Russian invaders out of his palace. You guys go down there and take a look. I don't want to hear this sound again, Solomon said coldly. Several servants were immediately relieved, and finally found the scapegoat. It seemed that the king was planning to take out his anger on these people. Solomon's men were convinced that their king could handle everything, so they immediately rushed downstairs impatiently, preparing to teach the intruders an unforgettable lesson. Only Solomon's steward felt that something was wrong with doing things this way, but at this time Solomon was obviously overwhelmed with anger. After all, the Rothschild family which was proud of its poor information, seemed useless in front of Franz, a time traveler even without the knowledge of time travelers. As long as Franz wanted to, with his status as a royal family, it would be easy to smooth the information gap with the Rothschild family. Rothschild is a deified name, and behind them is actually a huge information asymmetry. Nathan Rothschild was able to use this to harvest the London stock market. And Solomon Rothschild also used this to harvest Austria. However, in front of Franz, their advantage disappeared. Solomon, who had lost his usual weapon, felt very frightened, and his fear reached the point of anger. Solomon's men rushed downstairs, but the torrent of anger stopped abruptly like a stormy wave crashing on the shore. There were not many people on the other side, but they all looked tall and calm, and judging by their clothes, they most likely had pistols hidden on their bodies. In this era, it was not uncommon for rich people's bodyguards to carry guns when they went out. Vienna would not ban guns until 1849. At this time, it was commonplace for guns to be found in Vienna's weapon shops, bars, and even grocery stores. However, it is very unusual for such a large group of bodyguards with guns to appear together. There is no doubt that they are a difficult opponent. Solomon's men had an absolute advantage in numbers, but the other party showed no fear. It was obvious that the other party was emboldened and either had a strong background or was a group of desperados. Of course, Solomon's men felt that the latter was more likely, because in their eyes, the Russians were a group of reckless men, a group of uncivilized barbarians. But once courage is lost, it is difficult to get it back. Solomon's men immediately froze and didn't know what to do. At this time, the Russian leader spoke first. Vasily was not afraid of the mob in front of him, not even afraid of death, but he really did not dare to offend the big shot inside. Wait a minute. Vasily put his hand into his coat pocket, but there was a scream. What are you going to do? Don't move. We are not afraid of you. Although Solomon Rothschild was known as King Solomon, he did not have a real army at his command. If there had been an army, he would not have fled in disgrace in 1848. In fact, Solomon was so suspicious that for safety reasons, his bodyguards were actually a group of bank employees. These bank employees don't even have much experience in fighting. They are just used to being domineering and a little bit ruthless, but when faced with real desperados, they were like elementary school students going to the teacher's office for the first time, lacking confidence. Vasily said in not very fluent German, "I'm sorry, I can give you a sum of money and ask you to leave and pretend that nothing happened, okay?" After speaking, Vasily took out a stack of banknotes. 20, 50 florin banknotes, a total of 1,000 florins. In the Austrian Empire at this time, the annual salary of ordinary soldiers was 100 florins. 1,000 florins was equivalent to 10 years of military pay for an ordinary soldier, which was definitely not a small amount. However, the most important thing for Solomon's men was money. Seeing such a small amount of money, their confidence immediately increased, and they were even more sure that the other party was some desperado with lives at stake. Although they can't defeat each other, there are military police in Vienna, and Mr. Solomon is a good friend of Prime Minister Metternich. They don't need to be afraid no matter what. 1,000 florins? That's amazing. I'll give you 2,000 florins. Get out of here right now. Saccone returned coldly and threw the money in Vasily's face. Vasily seemed a little helpless, stepped forward and strangled Saccone's neck, and before Solomon's men could react, he pressed the black muzzle of the gun against Saccone's temple. Then Vasily made a gesture of silence under the shocked eyes of everyone. "How about you leave? I beg you." But Vasily did not lower the single-shot pistol pressed against Saccone's temple. "Do you know who we are? Whose person we are? Lord Solomon's bodyguards. Let me go, or I will throw you into the Danube to feed the fish." "Oh, who is Solomon?" Vasily said excitedly. "Ah, you pretending to be stupid. Who else is Solomon? Solomon Rothschild, who in Europe doesn't know our boss?" Saccone shouted. "Oh, it turns out he's a Jewish son of a bitch," Vasily said contemptuously. This sentence angered Solomon's bodyguards, most of whom were Jews, and they all drew their pistols and pointed them at Vasily. Vasily's men also refused to come and pulled down the cabinet next to them, and the two sides immediately became tense. The hotel manager originally planned to go upstairs to greet the distinguished guests, but was frightened out of his wits when he saw this scene. While no one noticed, the hotel manager carefully retreated down the stairs. He wanted to immediately run to the gendarmerie to report the incident. After all, the two people upstairs were guests of Prime Minister Metternich. This kind of discord between big shots is beyond the control of a hotel manager like him. However, as soon as he arrived at the door, he saw something even more terrifying. Archduke Karol and his bodyguards. Archduke Karol's guard was essentially different from the guards of other nobles, because it was basically an army. Almost everyone in the guard is a soldier of the Austrian Empire. They have been on the battlefield and killed people. Their power cannot be compared to even the most powerful gang in Vienna. The hotel manager didn't know why Archduke Karol came. He only knew that if Archduke Karol went upstairs and was hit by a stray bullet, or found out that there was actually a war going on here, he would simply not dare to think about it. Chapter 79 Double Dragon Club. On the outskirts of Vienna, the Cullen Manor, the Royal Academy for Women in Vienna, has been basically completed, and enrollment is going very smoothly, but teachers are hard to find. It seems that among the university-educated women in Vienna, there is only this strange woman around them, and those high-ranking professors seem to be completely uninterested in this new university. We can just sign employment contracts with them, and ask them to come to class when the semester starts. If they refuse, they will have to pay huge liquidated damages. As far as I know, those professors are poor people. At this time, the academic environment in Austria was not good, and most of the research had to be funded by oneself, so the Vienna University of Technology was so repulsive to non-aristocratic professors. Failure, you are going too far. No matter what, those professors are important pillars of this country. This statement is really rare. What I hear more often is moths, trash, and the like. In this era, there is no such thing as respecting teachers in Austria. The authority of teachers is very poor. The whole society respects power and wealth more than respect for knowledge. This is why Austrian scientists are always bound to the word poor. Together, don't take Prussia as an example. Prussian teachers have the highest status in the entire German region. As for female governesses like Thalia, they are usually at the bottom of the contempt chain. Even the governesses of the royal family are not welcomed by others. This is one of the reasons why it is so difficult for the academy to recruit teachers at this time. European women's work symbolized degradation, and studying was an act of witches. Yes, Thalia is a fallen witch in the eyes of people of this era. Okay, Thalia. One thing I've always been curious about is what major you studied in college. Franz said, law. After all, I want to be an official. Thalia answered without thinking. Franz heard a lot of dark clues. So, that means you've always been breaking the law. Thalia blushed and said in a very proud tone, I'm smart. I'm not complimenting you. Franz said angrily. Doppler was still looking on excitedly in the huge physics laboratory, like a child discovering a new toy. Mr. Doppler, are you satisfied with this laboratory? Franz asked. Franz didn't know much about the development of physics, nor did he know what equipment was needed to study physics, so he ordered someone to build an identical one according to the specifications of the physics laboratory of the University of Berlin. Archduke Franz, this physics laboratory is really a masterpiece. I will take good care of it, just like I take care of my own home. It seems that the great physicist and mathematician regarded himself as a janitor. There is also a physics library next door, which contains all German physics journals published in recent years. Of course, someone will send you the latest physics journals every month. If you need new instruments and equipment, though, write to me. Doubler was a little confused. Archduke Franz, am I not here to be a teacher? Yes, but the school is not open yet and there are no students, so you should do some research first. Franz replied. Archduke Franz, what do you need from me? This asked Franz. He really didn't know much about the physics of this era, but he thought that, since Doppler studies ultrasonic waves, it shouldn't be a problem to get a sonar. Then after some exchanges, Franz discovered a very serious problem. Doppler did not know what electromagnetic waves were. Study whatever you like to study. Franz gave up. The cognitive gap between the two was a bit big, and because Franz had not systematically studied the physics of this era, the two sides just kept talking about each other. Mouth communication. Doubler was also confused, but thanked Franz from the bottom of his heart for giving him this easy job. Franz asked the housekeeper in the manor to arrange a residence for Doubler, and repeatedly asked the housekeeper to respect Mr. Doubler. Franz went to a makeshift greenhouse on another estate, where the hybridization of high-yielding wheat seemed to be unsuccessful. The wheat brought back by Costa is indeed very high-yielding, but its adaptability is too poor and has very high requirements for temperature and humidity, and Franz cannot plant wheat in Brazil or Southeast Asia. To promote it in Austria, it was necessary to plant varieties suitable for the Austrian climate, so Franz tried to cross this wheat with Austrian wheat. Since the professors at the University of Vienna were not good enough, Franz found a group of gardeners from all over the country and asked them to try. If they succeeded, even if they failed, these people could still be gardeners, which would be fine for Franz's loss. In order to make this trip look more like a fun trip, Franz specially broke off 2 corns and put an ear of wheat on Thalia's head. As Franz left, a shabby young man and his father walked in. When the father saw Franz, he immediately pulled the boy aside, then took off his hat and lowered his head to show respect. Franz didn't pay much attention to the thin boy in front of him. The boy just looked at the child with envy, who seemed to have everything. After Franz left, the father came to the housekeeper cautiously and said, "Hello, sir. I'm Mendel, the gardener in the village of Heinzendorf. I also want to work for the royal family. Can you give it a try?" The butler's attitude was very arrogant, and he pointed to a corner. "The 6 wheat seedlings over there belong to you. No matter what method you use, as long as you succeed, you will get a reward of 5,000 florins from the Grand Duke. If you fail, all you will get is the fair home. Listen, do you understand?" "Thank you, sir. I will do my best." Old Mendel was interrupted by the butler before he finished speaking. "What's your name?" "Lionel." "Mendel," replied Mendel. The steward took out a sign, wrote Mendel on it, and hung it in front of the few wheat seedlings that old Mendel had received. After the housekeeper left, Mendel and his son sat down in front of the wheat seedlings. "Krigel, this is a good opportunity for our family. Once this is done, your mother will have enough money for medical treatment. You can also go back to school, and you can also raise a good dowry for your sister." "Yes, father," the thin boy replied. He was a genetics expert across the ages. His theory was not recognized until long after his death, so that future generations can only regret that he was born at the wrong time. In fact, the housekeeper in the manor lied. The reward given by Franz was 20,000 florins, and if he failed, he could also consider staying as a gardener. But based on his experience, the housekeeper would never ask a royal official to personally ask about the gardener's affairs, and the job opportunity of working as a gardener in the royal estate can also be fetched at a good price in the market. Chapter 80: Alexander's Mission. Vienna, Caesar Hotel, 2nd floor. The confrontation between the 2 sides continues. Both sides understand that once they start fighting, it will not end well, but they cannot stop. This strange situation made both parties uncomfortable, but no one dared to act rashly. On the 3rd floor, although Solomon Rothschild was upset, he never heard the gunshots or saw his men return, but he gradually regained his senses. The following must have entered a stalemate, and the opponent must be very difficult to deal with. Although Solomon was a little arrogant, he was not arrogant to the point of stupidity. He quickly distinguished the pros and cons as a businessman. Peace is still the most important thing. At this time, he doesn't want to have another enemy. So Solomon made a prompt decision and came downstairs with a few personal bodyguards. He saw Saccone being kidnapped by the Russians. Solomon, who was well informed, couldn't help but frown when he heard that Vasily's blunt German was mixed with some Austrian accent. It was not unusual for a Russian to speak a few words of German, but it was common for Russians to hire Prussians as tutors. Russia has had a lot of Prussian fans since Tsar Peter III, and even the current Tsar Nicholas I was the son-in-law of the King of Prussia. It is impossible for Prussians to have an Austrian accent. In addition, these people were indifferent when they heard their names. They were obviously not businessmen who often traveled to Austria. Then it is most likely the result of a certain Russian big shot putting these bodyguards together for training before coming to Austria. With the Rothschild family's intelligence capabilities and Solomon's experience, it was easy to determine the identity of the other party. Although Solomon Rothschild hated each other extremely, he couldn't do anything to them even in his own palace. After thinking about it, it was better to spend money and eliminate disasters. Sir, can you let go of my employee? Solomon's voice was not loud, but it had an irresistible majesty. Vasily was stunned for a moment, then pushed Saccone away, and then raised his hands to show that he was not hostile. Ah, you that Solomon? I heard you are very powerful. I'm not powerful, I'm just a businessman. I hope both of us can let it go. My employees were offended just now. This is my compensation to you. After hearing Solomon's words, Vasily and others all made disdainful snorts when the servants beside Solomon opened the box. They all closed their mouths again. The box contained a box of golden sincerity, with 10 small gold bars lying quietly inside. The value of this gold was approximately 11,000 florins, which was 110 years' wages for an ordinary Austrian soldier. Vasily did not speak, nor did he step forward to take the box, which further confirmed Solomon's guess that ordinary people could resist the temptation of gold. Just when Solomon thought everything was under control, the door to the room on the second floor didn't open. A young man appeared at the door, and 2 graceful girls were dressing him. I'm not used to living here, so let's find another place to live. And that vampire, another name for a banker who makes loan sharks. I heard that your family is very rich, but wasting is not a good habit. If you have more money, you can consider donating it to church or state. The young man scratched his head again and continued with a regretful expression. Oh, I forgot. You Jews don't have a country of your own. The 2 girls beside the young man couldn't help laughing. But the person on Solomon's side looked extremely ugly. Fortunately, Solomon was very skilled and signaled his servant to send the gold forward. Instead of letting the servant go on, Vasily snatched the box and walked up to the young man with a smile. After all, in Vasily's eyes, it was indeed a happy thing to get money after being scolded. The young man grabbed the gold bar impatiently, sniffed it in front of his nose, and then knocked the box over. Gold is a good thing, but it's a pity that it smells like a Jew. Keep it for yourself and build a coffin. Maybe you can use it. Saccone, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly roared like a dog with its owner by his side. You are dead. King Solomon will not let you go. I really want to shoot this idiot in front of me, but it's no use now. The young man heard Saccone's roar and just turned around and smiled. Aren't all the kings of Austria concurrently served by the Emperor of the Austrian Empire? Don't you Jews plan to establish a state in Vienna? Saccone looked back at Solomon, who had already seen the coldness in his eyes. The young man did not wait for anyone to answer, but strode directly down the stairs. The followers behind him also left with him, without even looking at the gold on the ground. On the first floor, the hotel manager was still trying to persuade Archduke Karol not to go upstairs. In fact, the hotel manager was a little worried. Archduke Karol had a residence in Vienna, so there was no need for him to stay in the hotel. The hotel manager heard the footsteps and turned around to see that it was the guests on the second floor. He immediately shouted and stood in front of Archduke Karol. Protect Archduke Karol. Then, the hotel manager was kicked down by the guards around Archduke Karol. The young man who came downstairs was startled when he saw Archduke Karol, then smiled and opened his arms. Hello, dear Uncle Karl. Archduke Karol also stretched out his hand and hugged the other party. Hello, Alexander. Did you enjoy your time in Vienna? Yes, it is a very beautiful city. The city is beautiful, and the people are even more beautiful. Alexander smiled and pointed at Grand Duchess Carolina, who was hiding behind Archduke Karol. Carolina is the youngest daughter of Archduke Karol. She is already 11 years old. It is the age when a child with a yellow mouth changes into a girl. She is both curious and a little afraid of boys. Archduke Karol was famous for his strict requirements for his sons, but he was also famous for his doting on his 2 daughters. This caused Carolina to lack etiquette. Archduke Karol touched Carolina's head lovingly and introduced to Alexander. This is Carolina, my little girl. She's a little shy. Please don't mind." Alexander looked at the Grand Duchess Carolina. His visit to Vienna was nominally for a study tour, but his father gave him an errand, which was to find a wife, preferably a German, to facilitate the completion of his father's great plan. Although Alexander was very dissatisfied with the task given to him by Nicholas I, Alexander succumbed after being beaten several times. Although Archduke Karol, the father of Grand Duchess Carolina, was not a king, his family's wealth and status were no less than those of the German princes and kings. Moreover, a marriage with the Habsburg family is very beneficial to Russia. After all, there have been constant frictions between Britain and Russia, with various tit-for-tat confrontations emerging one after another, and there is a blood feud between Russia and France. The King of Prussia was the father-in-law of Nicholas I. The two had different personalities, but they had the same philosophy. William III also helped suppress the Polish uprising, which made the relationship between the two even closer in the struggle for hegemony between Russia and Britain. Austria will undoubtedly be the important weight that determines the balance of victory. But Alexander's gaze, as if looking at prey, gave Carolina a very bad first impression. In Carolina's eyes, Alexander seemed to be a big bad wolf who wanted to eat the little white rabbit. So Carolina continued to hide behind Archduke Karol and said coquettishly, "Father, I'm afraid." Chapter 81 Mess. To be honest, Archduke Karol had a very bad first impression of the young man in front of him. When they met again, the first time Archduke Charles met Alexander was at a ceremony when Nicholas I awarded him the Order of Santa Anna, First Class. The Order of Saint Anna, First Class, a high-level Russian medal, is often awarded to veterans who have served for many years and important foreign generals. Although Alexander was just a child at that time, he was meticulously groomed from top to bottom, showing both the vigor of a child and the rigor of a soldier. So when Nicholas I wrote a letter, hoping that Archduke Karol could take his little daughter to a blind date with Alexander, he readily agreed. But today's meeting made Archduke Karol very disappointed. What he saw was a disheveled libertine who smelled of alcohol and women's perfume. What was even more annoying was the way Alexander looked at his daughter, like a market scoundrel. However, Alexander didn't think so much. He was still evaluating Carolina's appearance in the future, and she might be the type he likes. Alexander liked Uncle Karol quite a lot, because he would not insist on line tactics like the old antiques in the Russian army. Archduke Karol's skirmishing tactics and defensive tactics were evil in the eyes of Nicholas I, but in the eyes of Alexander, he was a hard-to-find confidant. Starting from Napoleon, Europe's tactical thinking was to attack, and attack again. This idea continued until World War I. Archduke Karol's hobby is the iron barrel array, layer after layer of defense, digging ditches and building parapets, and he wishes he could build a bastion in his hometown opposite. Since Nicholas I was a military fan, Alexander was forced to study military affairs since he was a child. Alexander's biggest hobby was to do the opposite of Nicholas I. If you attack, I will defend. When you confront me, I will launch a sneak attack. As a result, Alexander suffered severe beatings from Nicholas I since he was a child. Alexander's teacher was a conservative, but what's interesting is that he wanted his student to become a Russian monarch who advocated civilization and guided openness in the future. Under his long-term instruction, Alexander became a liberal with great sympathy for the Decembrists. The Decembrists launched a rebellion in the Senate Square that year, and Nicholas I had forgiven their sins, shooting the governor of St. Petersburg, a reactionary rebellion. He did not want to step on the blood of his subjects to ascend to the throne, and hoped to adopt a tolerant policy. At that time, the cavalry of the guards who swore allegiance to Nicholas I had been assembled, but Nicholas did not issue an order to suppress it. Even after repeated urging from his officers, he only issued an order to expel. However, the guards were not expelled. Instead, they shot back the guards' cavalry. The deaths of dozens of guards' cavalry also strengthened Nicholas I's determination to suppress the bloodshed. In the end, Nicholas I ascended to the throne of Tsar with the blood of Russians. Nicholas I wanted Alexander to find a Prussian princess, so Alexander decided to find an Austrian princess, because Prussia and Austria were sworn enemies. It's just that Nicholas I already knew Alexander's thoughts, so arrangements were made. causing Alexander to misjudge and think that Nicholas I wanted him to marry a Prussian princess at this time. Alexander felt that he was full of masculine charm, unrestrained and unrestrained. The little girl must have been embarrassed to see him, and Archduke Carol must have admired him very much. Alexander was thinking in his mind, let's have meal, dance a little, set a wedding date, and then go back home, and piss that old bastard off to death. Archduke Carol looked at Alexander and his party, thinking they were here to greet him, but these people had taken out their luggage, and he couldn't help but feel a little confused. Alexander, are you leaving? Oh, something unpleasant happened just now. There are too many Jews in this hotel, arranged by Prince Metternich. I'm not used to it. Alexander said. Of course, Archduke Carol knew who was staying at the Caesar Hotel, and he also knew the Russians' attitude towards the Jews. He said quietly, there is something special about the Jews who live here. They are all partners of the Imperial government. It's quite special. There is actually King Solomon in it. Archduke Carol naturally understood what this meant. Alexander was complaining. Archduke Carol also hated people like Solomon, but the vulgarity and frivolity revealed in Alexander's words and deeds just now refreshed his understanding. When did this kid Alexander become so unreliable? He sighed in his heart. Alexander's words just now made Archduke Carol feel very embarrassed. Prince Metternich happened to hear the news and rushed over. You should sort out your own mess. Archduke Carol sullenly said a word and then left with Carolina. His guards followed closely behind, leaving behind a confused Alexander and a grimacing Prince Metternich. Schönbrunn Palace, Franz's bedroom. In 1836, Austria's fiscal revenue continued to increase and had reached 170 million florins, and with the improvement of railway transportation, revenue was likely to continue to increase. It's just that as Austria's fiscal revenue increases, its expenditures also increase, and the increase is faster than the income growth. The army requires the replacement of new M1831 rifles and updated smoothbore cannons to cope with the war that may break out at any time in the future. The imaginary enemy of the Austrian army was the French army. The French army purchased a batch of new equipment. This made the army faction headed by the Minister of War, Count Turel, unable to sit still and strongly demanded funding. Even without appropriations, the War Department was quietly updating the army's equipment. These include the sale of obsolete weapons to Mexico and Schindler, but the limited scale of the transaction cannot satisfy the appetite of the Austrian army. At the same time, Austria's lack of maritime transport capacity has resulted in the army being pocketed by middlemen. Austria's navy uses Venetian heritage, most of which were built during the Napoleonic Wars. Most of them are in a scrapped state and cannot carry out ocean warfare at all. Because the imaginary enemy of the Austrian navy has always been barbarous human traffickers. Therefore, the ships of the Austrian navy are built around the 3 points of small, smart, and fast. The Austrian navy's design concept of small boats carrying small guns has resulted in the Austrian navy being the only navy in Europe that can sail on inland rivers. However, this concept has long been outdated. Now is the era of cannons and giant ships. Whoever has bigger cannons and bigger ships has more say. The Austrian navy is still somewhat self-aware. They did not ask for the construction of first and second level battleships. They just wanted to build some 4th or 5th level battleships to maintain their absolute advantage over the Italian region and retain the ability to fight the French squadron. In addition to this, there were subsidies that had existed since the time of Francis II. Free schools in Dalmatia and free food in Galicia. The governor of Galicia would regularly give some grain and poultry to the serfs in Galicia in the name of the country to reduce serf rebellion. In fact, the Galician serfs mythologized the Habsburg rulers, just as the Russian serfs liked to view the Tsar as a loving father. When Austria annexed Dalmatia, it exempted locals from military service. This was widely praised at the time, but now proved to be a bad move, which led to long-term poverty in Dalmatia. The Croatian region, which is even more barren than Dalmatia, has maintained positive population growth through military service for the empire. In Dalmatia, the Austrian imperial government had to allocate funds to help the poor, the dredging of rivers, the restoration of the silver mines in Tyrol, and the maintenance of road traffic almost overwhelmed the Austrian Empire. Of course, Austria's debt is not included in this list. If it is not repaid, it will not be repaid. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 82. Bottom line. There are two things that Austria is thankful for. First, several important railways were completed. Second, due to the economic crisis and the rise in international precious metal prices, the silver mines in Tyrol are valuable for mining again. Vienna to Bayreuth, Vienna to Dresden, Vienna to Udine. These routes strengthen the connection between central Austria, southern Germany and northern Italy. The former is Austria's most important foreign trade area, and the latter is Austria's most important tax source. Although northern Italy had declined at this time, it was still a tax-rich area. As one of Austria's most important tax sources, it provided even more tax revenue than Hungary, which accounted for 40% of the empire's land area. In 1833, Austria's fiscal revenue was 130,269,877 florins, while Hungary only contributed 23 million florins, even lower than Bohemia's 25 million florins, and far lower than northern Italy's 30 million florins. Florin. By 1836, Austria's fiscal revenue soared to 170 million florins. Benefiting from joining the German customs union, Bohemia's economy experienced explosive growth, and its fiscal revenue also soared to 35 million florins, already equal to northern Italy. Remained flat, while Hungary's revenue fell by 1 million florins as time goes by. As a region close to Germany, and experiencing rapid industrial development, Bohemia will only become more open and its importance will become more and more obvious. It's just that, while the Austrian region is generally making rapid progress, the Hungarian region seems a bit different. A group of young nobles and emerging capitalists headed by Széchenyi hope to join this feast. However, Hungary's participation in the German customs union violated both the German customs union agreement and the agreement between Austria and Hungary. Count Korolev and Metternich were unwilling to intervene in the Hungarian issue. After all, the current situation was already dire for the Austrian Empire, so they had no choice but to give up. Britain and France were at a stalemate on the Spanish issue. Prussia was doing everything possible to cause trouble to Austria in the German customs union, and Russia was ready to make moves in the east. The new king of the Kingdom of Sardinia, Carlo Alberto, was a restless man. He developed the economy and expanded the army, while at the same time he was dissatisfied with France and Austria. You must know that the existence of the Kingdom of Sardinia is nothing more than a buffer zone between France and Austria. At that time, it was generally believed that Alberto's ambition was an unrealistic delusion. But even so, Austria had to reactivate the veteran Radetzky and let him serve as the commander-in-chief of the Austrian army in northern Italy. Radetzky had originally retired in 1829, but War Minister Tyrol felt that the old general could still fight. At the same time, Radetzky himself was impoverished after retirement and was worried about the livelihood of his 8 children. However, the old general who went to Italy in 1831 married an Italian noblewoman in the same year to show his deep love for Italy and imply that Austria would treat Italians equally. Radetzky himself did exactly this. He never felt that Alberto and his army of 20,000 were a problem. But this veteran who had experienced the Napoleonic Wars knew what a terrible force it was to incite those serfs and poor people who could not survive. Radetzky still remembers how the poor were deceived by Napoleon's unrealistic promises and turned their guns on their own countrymen. But Radetzky asked the army to help the poor. When he took office, when his soldiers broke the law, he would not choose to cover up, but immediately punish the troubled soldiers. Sometimes it was even unfair, but this made him and the army gained a good reputation among the poor in this era. Usually in order to maintain the combat effectiveness and loyalty of soldiers, generals would choose to protect some of their subordinates who made mistakes. In order to win people's hearts, Radetzky chose to win over the people, but his approach was a bit extreme. Even when his own son was treated unfairly, he chose to endure it, and asked his son to apologize to the Italians. Anton von Radetzky was the third son of Marshal Radetzky. He had no talent and did not yearn for a life outside the army, so he always stayed with Marshal Radetzky. One day, Anton Radetzky was ordered to patrol the streets. When he passed a cafe, he heard people inside promoting Mazzini's anti-Austrian ideas. At that time, Italy was just a geographical term, and most of its land belonged to Austria, and the core of Mazzini's thought was to expel the Austrians from Italy. This made Anton Radetzky furious. After all, the mission of the Italian Legion was to defend Italy. How could he allow someone to promote the idea of making Italy independent? Gentlemen, please stop your conversation immediately. This is an act of treason. You German pig, don't bother with us. This is private property. A tall man said in Italian. God bless him. He can understand what we are saying. The man's words caused a burst of laughter. After all, in the eyes of these people, the Austrian soldiers were only bluffing and had nothing to fear. Anton Radetzky corrected him. First, I'm a Czech, and second, this is a cafe, a public place. The man turned over the business sign and then said to Anton Radetzky very calmly, "It's closed now, you can go." There was another burst of laughter, and Anton von Radetzky was so angry that he rushed forward and struggled with the man. The military police arrived and separated the two, and then they were sent to Marshal Radetzky's office. Before Anton von Radetzky could explain, he was kicked by his father and asked to apologize to the Italian. Anton von Radetzky was naturally furious. Marshal Radetzky could only order him to apologize to the Italian in his capacity as marshal. Finally, the Italian left proudly. It is said that the Italian was an abbot and very influential. Radetzky used this almost dog-licking method to get the poor people at the bottom of northern Italy to accept the existence of the Austrian army. However, in the eyes of some self-respecting Italian nobles and businessmen, these soldiers were a group of lowly losers, and giving them funding and respect was a meaningless waste. The middle and high-level Italians often showed an arrogant attitude in front of the Austrian army. As the commander-in-chief, Radetzky actually tolerated the unfair treatment of his subordinate soldiers by middle and high-level Italians. The reason why the old marshal did this was because he had always regarded the French as an imaginary enemy, and he also wanted to form a militia team like Napoleon for use in wartime. However, Radetzky was not Napoleon, and the Austrian Empire did not have enough funds. At this time, the bottom class of Italy was not even able to survive, so his plan could only end in vain. Vienna, Hall of Mirrors. Ferdinand I looked at the imperial order in his hand. My stupid brother, who wrote this imperial edict? My poor brother, have your eyes not been able to work well lately? There is my son's signature on it. My stupid brother, the name on this is obviously Franz. My poor brother, have you forgotten that my son's name is Franz? My stupid brother, you have never been able to lie since you were a child. Do you think I will be fooled? My poor brother, why are you spitting bubbles from your mouth? My stupid brother, I'm sick and you haven't called the doctor yet. Before he lost consciousness, Ferdinand I stamped the emperor's seal on the royal decree. That day an investigative team left Vienna and went to Milan to arrest the traitors who had beaten Captain Anton Radetzky. Chapter 83. Bottom line. Milan, Italy. A group of white knights entered the city of Milan, where they were warmly received by the local mayor Gabriel Casati. Gabriel Casati didn't know what these emperor's envoys were doing, but this did not prevent him from being satisfied with the current empire's policies. Gabriel felt that Francis II was a genius, because even after his death, his policies did not need to change at all. In fact, this is just an appearance. The real reason was that Emperor Ferdinand lacked the ability and will to properly exercise the power of the monarch, and the ministers below him blamed each other and quarreled endlessly when things happened, resulting in the delay in passing new national policies. Gabriel Casati's idea is very simple. He believes that good policies can make everyone make money. He can't understand why some people always like to compare themselves with Hungarians, and he doesn't understand why some people always want to squeeze into Vienna. I don't even understand why some people miss Napoleon. Gabriel Casati is an industrial and commercial aristocrat. He still remembers that during the Napoleonic period, the French robbed all the money and food and took away an entire generation of young people. Although later generations spoke highly of the Napoleonic War, in the eyes of people at the time, Napoleon took away everything from them. Before the Napoleonic Wars, northern Italy was one of the richest regions in Europe. After the Napoleonic Wars, northern Italy fell into famine and riots. This situation did not improve until the last few years of the reign of Francis II. At that time, there were continuous good years, and Marshal Radetzky took office. The old general struck hard at the rebels many times. Let the rebels no longer dare to cross the border easily. After Austria joined the German customs union, it opened up new markets for Italy and provided relatively sufficient funds for the army. At the banquet, Gabriel raised his glass and said, "To the great Emperor Ferdinand, I wish your majesty good health and a long life." In fact, Gabriel didn't mean anything else, but it was extremely harsh to the ears of the Austrian investigation team. Ferdinand's physical condition had nothing to do with his health, and no one expected him to live a long life. Seeing that the atmosphere was a little awkward, Gabriel decided to talk about business first. "Gentlemen, what can I do for you? We have been ordered to investigate the attack on Captain Anton von Radetzky. We need to know the location of Dilmunde Monastery and the identity of the attacker." Gabriel naturally knew the location of the Dilmunde Monastery and the identities of the attackers, but he thought this was all over. "Well, gentlemen, you may not know that Marshal Radetzky has no intention of pursuing this matter." "Oh, no, Mr. Mayor, this is an order from His Majesty the Emperor. Captain Anton von Radetzky is an Imperial officer. He serves the Empire. He is a subject of His Majesty the Emperor. We are obliged to protect his right, but it is said that Captain Anton took action first, but we heard that Captain Anton was just performing official duties to stop the other party from promoting treasonous remarks." Gabriel found it a bit difficult to handle. Father Leonardo was the abbot of Dilmunde Monastery, but he was a decent person in Milan, and those attackers were also decent people. And the investigation team in Vienna carried the Emperor's imperial order, which was not something he could deal with. "Gentlemen, please excuse me. As we age, our stomachs always feel a little uncomfortable." Gabriel stood up and left. After a while, Gabriel came back and brought back a group of dancing girls. "Gentlemen, I'm sorry for being with you just now. As compensation, I will let you experience the Italian style." Even the Vienna investigation team could not refuse Mr. Mayor's kindness, but Gabriel felt that the investigation team seemed to be missing one person. Dilmunde Monastery. "Damn Austrians, I will let all the believers gather here tomorrow, and I will see what they can do to me. Go back and tell Gabriel that I will not leave. It is the Austrians who should leave." Then Father Leonardo closed the door hard, and Gabriel's servant could only leave in anger. Followed by a figure. An investigation team from Vienna came to Milan to investigate the attack on Captain Anton, and word soon spread in the city. This matter was discussed in pubs and coffee shops in the city, and everyone speculated on the fate of Father Leonardo. Obviously, most people still sympathized with the local priest. This is also the effect Gabriel wants. He feels that the Austrians have no courage and can only bluff. Even the emperor cannot disobey public opinion. Even if the crime is true, he can only choose to forgive. After all, it is God's business to punish the wicked. After the investigation team obtained the identities of the 5 attackers, they asked the military police to post notices in the city offering rewards for the charges against the 5 individuals. This move immediately caused the 5 attackers to panic, and even Gabriel didn't know what to do. The 5 attackers had no choice but to hide in the monastery. After all, if the army broke into the monastery to arrest people, it would greatly affect Habsburg's reputation. Father Leonardo had gathered the believers together long ago. He knew very well that these peasants knew nothing and would do whatever he said. The imperial government could not do anything to him. However, Franz had anticipated this a long time ago. He had already made arrangements in advance There was nothing moral about this guy, who liked to use the ignorant masses as a shield point. Before that, a member of the investigation team visited the cafe where the incident occurred and asked about the day's events. The owner of the cafe did not know the identity of the other party, so he boasted about Father Leonardo's deeds, and revealed the fact that Father Leonardo was actually the owner of this cafe. At first, the member of the investigation team pretended not to believe it, but soon received confirmation from store employees and customers. On the same day, the military police arrested the owner and clerk of the cafe. On the other hand, the 5 attackers had a bad record, and the crimes recorded were simply heinous. The investigation team felt that the time was ripe, so they came to Delmunda Abbey with evidence of guilt. The crimes of Father Leonardo and the attackers were revealed one by one. Father Leonardo had more than 50,000 florins in deposits in 3 banks, ran a cafe and a brothel, and had 6 lovers, a dozen illegitimate children. What the investigation team did not expect was that believers in Father Leonardo's parish actually began to report Father Leonardo's evil deeds, including stealing other people's privacy when listening to their confessions, taking the opportunity to blackmail, forcing a nun to be his lover, etc. Father Leonardo tried to escape, but was caught by angry parishioners who sent him to Piazza del Duomo in the center of Milan. In the Duomo Square, the evil deeds of the 5 attackers were revealed one by one. The investigation team declared the 5 attackers guilty of treason and sentenced them to hanging. They also provided for Captain Anton von Radetzky, and the 2 soldiers who were beaten were awarded medals and pensions. The personal property of the 5 attackers will be used as compensation for the victims. Finally, Marshal Radetzky announced the emperor's decree: evil people should not be tolerated, and good people should not be unjust. For some reason, someone shed tears of excitement at this time. Chapter 84. Regarding the listing, I would like to ask you for advice. The results were probably not very good. The editor said that he would no longer recommend it, and asked me if I wanted to put it on the shelves. I plan to spend 1 to 2 weeks sorting out my ideas and correcting the typos in the previous section. The number of updates per day will be 2,000 to 3,000. Of course, you can also choose to put it on the shelves directly, 4,000 plus per day, but I feel a little sorry for you. In addition, I personally promise that this book will have a formal conclusion, and I will give you an explanation. And I will also give an explanation to myself. Chapter 85. The Chosen General. Vienna, Franz's bedroom. Franz has actually always been curious about why Austria closed the silver mines in Tyrol. Why did the mines stop being mined in 1827, even though they could still be mined after World War II, but they were not exhausted until 1957. Thalia found a report about the Tyrol silver mine. The reason given above was that the quality of the Tyrol silver mine was poor and the revenue was not worth the cost, so it had to be stopped. Franz rubbed his chin, wondering why it had been losing money for years in the hands of the Austrian government, and then if it was transferred to individuals, it could continue to mine for 100 years. Franz compared the income statements of several mines together, and found that the income from the Tyrol silver mine was not as good as the iron mine under his own name. Franz thinks it is impossible. Unless silver mines cannot be mined, the income from silver mines cannot be lower than iron mines. Judging from the fact that private enterprises can continue to mine for hundreds of years, the Tyrol silver mines are far from when it is exhausted. Then there may be only one thing: poor supervision. Just like the customs in the Qing dynasty, there are leaks everywhere. What made Franz even more angry was that whoever was clever came up with the idea to blow up and bury the mine when abandoning the Tyrol silver mine. Re-excavating the mine pit is not only time consuming and labor intensive, but also requires a large additional cost. But generally speaking, the resumption of mining of the Tyrol silver mine is still very beneficial to Austria. After all, this is a direct benefit, and it can also be used to mortgage and defraud loans. The Austrian army's problem was easy to solve. Chandler's order came again. In addition to 6,000 rifles, they also wanted 20 cannons. Only this time they paid the bill not with silver, but with part silver, part gold, ivory, pearls, jade, and some precious wood. It seems that Chandler has made up its mind, or is in big trouble. This may be a catastrophe for Chandler, but it is an opportunity for Austria. It depends on whether Ambrosius can seize it. Of course, Franz will also ask the church to help. After all, Archbishop Prussia has recently made a lot of money selling sacred radiance and holy water. Bleaching powder and alcohol cost nothing. Although some people discovered it, their influence was far less than that of the church. The same products just couldn't be sold, and the church's supply even exceeded demand. In order to squeeze out possible competitors, the church frantically lowered prices, which also discouraged some weak people. With the promotion of church products, what was supposed to be an outbreak of cholera did not appear in the ghettos of Vienna. The number of deaths from dysentery in Austria has also plummeted. Coupled with the bumper harvest and economic prosperity in recent years, railway construction and public projects have absorbed a large number of refugees, which has increased the happiness of the Austrian people. The problem of the navy is difficult to solve. If you want to build a fleet, you will need millions of florins to build a few frigates and cruisers at most. If you include the training of artillery and sailors, the cost will be sky high. The Austrian Navy proposed to build a powerful formation of 4 fourth-level battleships, 6 cruisers, and 10 frigates to maintain absolute suppression of the Sardinian Navy. In fact, the Kingdom of Sardinia's Navy has 1 second-level battleship as its flagship, 1 third-level battleship, and 10 fourth-level battleships. Although the number of ships is far less than that of the Austrian Navy, the difference between gunboats and battleships is not just quantity. Can make up for it. In the naval battle of 1827, the British battleships Asia and Easter broke into the Egyptian Navy's queue, shattering Egypt's naval dream in just 2 hours. However, they are not the strongest force of the British at sea, and they can only tremble in front of those first-class sailing battleships. Austria's opponent was not the British or the Kingdom of Sardinia, but the Egyptian fleet. At this time, competing with Britain for maritime power was seeking death. The number of battleships available to Austria was not as good as the number of first-class battleships of the opponent. The Kingdom of Sardinia borders Austria and can be pushed forward by the army. There is no doubt that the Austrian army definitely has this strength. Austria's incompetence exposed in the 2 Turkish-Egyptian wars was the real reason for Austria's decline in international status. Later generations always said that Metternich was weak, which led the British to skip Austria and punish Egypt alone. In fact, the fundamental reason is that Austria does not always have a strong navy. It can only look at the faces of the British, the French, and the Russians. As a result, Metternich was hesitant. In the end, he could only acquiesce in the British behavior and act as a subordinate behind the British. But the British had no intention of accepting the little brother of the Austrian Empire. They turned around and left Austria aside, and then took the blame during the Crimean War. In order to change Austria's destiny, a navy capable of defeating the Egyptian fleet was necessary. After the Battle of Navarino, the Egyptian navy suffered a devastating blow. At this time, the strength of the Austrian navy could really cope with it. But if everything goes according to historical development, the Ottoman fleet will defect to Egypt. At this time, the Ottoman fleet has more than 30 large and small ships, including the largest sailing battleship Mahmudiyya in this era. This is not what the Austrian navy can handle. Without strength, it will naturally lack confidence. Of course, it is also unrealistic to expect Austria to build a fleet that can defeat the Ottoman navy in 2 or 3 years, but there is still hope for building a mixed fleet that can quickly defeat the Egyptian fleet and deliver the Austrian army to Egypt. Of course, Austria's sending troops to resolve this dispute is only the last resort. France still hopes that Prince Metternich can complete the achievement of diplomatic victory. There is good news for the Austrian navy, that is, Archduke Friedrich, the third son of Archduke Karol, is going to join the navy. This Archduke, who likes ship models, will carry out comprehensive reforms of the Austrian navy, and the Austrian navy will also usher in its first glorious period. Archduke Friedrich graduated from the military academy at the age of 13, spent another 2 years studying shipbuilding, and joined the navy at the age of 16 to start reforms. He was a naturally chosen man with talent, enthusiasm, and financial resources. However, such a genius would never have imagined that he would face a game that would change the fate of the Austrian Empire 4 years later. His reforms were still too conservative. Egypt was not the only loser in the Turkish-Egyptian war. Austria exposed its diplomatic weakness and weak naval strength. In 1840, the Austrian Navy and the British Royal Navy jointly blockaded Alexandria, bombarded Sidon and Beirut, organized a landing at Acre, and brutally brutalized the Egyptian army. It looks very beautiful and shows off its national prestige. However, in the eyes of the old empire, the Austrian Navy is like a clown, and the improvised marines are even more ridiculous, as the saying goes. Laymen watch the excitement, while insiders watch the door. What the nobles accompanying the Austrian army saw was the huge number of Austrian fleets, and the sky was filled with gunpowder smoke after rounds of artillery fire. However, what the British and French fleet commanders saw was a group of miscellaneous fish who did not understand naval tactics. Their shipbuilding technology was terrible and clumsy, and they did not have large ships that could support maritime battles. The main artillery was actually an 8-pounder, which once made the British fleet commander think that the opponent was a group of land forces. In fact, in the Austrian Navy, most of the officers were temporarily removed from the army, and the technical staff were also temporarily recruited. As for the sailors, many of them were temporary workers recruited from the port bars. It is difficult for such a makeshift force to be valued by a power with a strong naval tradition like Britain. Chapter 86 Navy. The only way France could think of to break the situation was to use steam battleships. At this time, Austria already had its own steam shipyard, and it was not difficult to develop steam battleships. Some large steamships can even be equipped with artillery, and can be used as battleships with a little modification. The price/performance ratio is very cost effective. The Austrians have done this in history. The advantage of steam battleships is unparalleled speed. The speed of first-class battleships is usually 8 to 9 knots, while the speed of steam battleships can easily exceed 15 knots, and is very little affected by the weather. Austria wanted to defeat the Egyptian fleet not necessarily through a large-scale naval battle, but also through a quick and effective sneak attack. After all, according to later generations on sea power, it is easier for the attacking party to take the initiative and have an advantage. The speed of steamships is exactly what Austria needs. This is because Austria relies on diplomatic tightrope-like means to maintain its international status. But the embarrassing thing is that its large, albeit plump, nature prevents it from relying on balancing means to avoid the great power's excessive attention or contempt for it. Otherwise, what awaits Austria is a European-wide encirclement network, and the response of Britain and France is particularly important here. Therefore, France hoped to achieve a diplomatic victory rather than a bloodbath. No one is afraid of a clown, and no powerful country hopes that another powerful country will appear around it. There is no doubt that Austria is a land power, but if Austria becomes a naval power, will it affect the situation in the Mediterranean and even the world? It's hard to say what impact the situation will have. As for uniting Egypt to fight against European powers, don't even think about it. An earthworm shakes a tree, which is both admirable and ridiculous. The Egyptian Pasha, Muhammad Ali, started out in the wilderness and became an emperor. He invited the heroes of Europe to fight against the Blue Sea. Although his success failed and his dreams were shattered, he was still a hero. However, this great Arab hero tried his best, tried all his tricks, and spent all the money he had saved in his life. In the end, he could not even scratch the paint of the British flagship. At this time, Britain had 16 first-class battleships, 21 second-class battleships, 57 third-class battleships, and countless small auxiliary ships. France has 6 first-class battleships, 7 second-class battleships, and 10 third-class battleships. Russia has 5 first-class battleships, 16 second-class battleships, and 19 third-class battleships. The United States has 2 first-class battleships. Spain has 1 first-class battleship and 1 second-class battleship. The Ottomans had 3 first-tier battleships, 6 second-tier battleships, and 6 third-tier battleships. The Kingdom of Sardinia has 1 second-level battleship and 1 third-level battleship. Statistics between major powers will not count non-capital ships. Britain had the ability to concentrate all the battleships in Europe and sink them all. Austria has only a few third-level battleships that have exceeded their age and are in the scrapping period, anchored in the port of Venice. As for the British's desire to unilaterally monopolize Egypt, it is impossible. As long as they do the same thing as the British did in the Straits Convention, the final result will most likely be an equal share of interests among the great powers. In this way, Austria has one more product dumping ground, and one more source of cotton. It no longer has to worry about the looks of Americans at this time. The cotton used in Europe was mainly produced in the United States, so the United States was also called the Cotton Kingdom. This Turkish-Egyptian war will do more harm than good to Austria. Austria needs to maintain its dignity as a great power, and at the same time, avoid falling into the struggle between Britain, Russia, and Britain and France. But there is no need to change history to help Egypt. After all, Muhammad Ali Pasha does not seem to be a grateful person. In order to gain more bargaining chips for the Austrian Empire, Franz planned to meet the first man in the history of the Austrian Empire's navy, Archduke Friedrich Ferdinand Leopold. Schönbrunn Palace, Royal Gardens. Archduke Friedrich looked very reluctant. He was already 16 years old. He had graduated from the military academy when he was 13. Everyone said that he would be the greatest naval admiral in the history of the Austrian Empire. I'm convinced of this. As soon as Archduke Friedrich entered the navy, the naval commander entered a state of semi-retirement. The entire navy followed his lead. His father promised to provide him with a sponsorship of 2 million florins, and the Minister of War, Count Girol, also expressed his willingness. Try your best to secure a budget for the navy. Archduke Friedrich was proficient in naval warfare, knew battleship design, was a professional in artillery, and was even proficient in ship operating techniques. He felt that he would be able to build a maritime force that could suppress the Kingdom of Sardinia in 10 years. Historically, he did spend 10 years building a fleet and then drowned as a Marshall Point. But today Archduke Friedrich had to come to play with the children. What does a 7-year-old kid know? Do you want me to play hide and seek with him? Archduke Friedrich hated this boring social etiquette, but he could only think about it in his heart. After all, he was still very afraid of Archduke Karol. Archduke Friedrich was hailed as a genius since he was a child, but he was never recognized by his father. Instead of being as tough as his eldest brother Albrecht, he chose to escape. Although escaping is shameful, it is very useful. Friedrich chose to become a navy. As expected, Archduke Karol would not point fingers at things he did not understand. This made Friedrich feel very comfortable. However, he was still very concerned about his strict father. Afraid. Although Archduke Karol himself often quarreled with the old emperor, he hoped that his heirs would not imitate him. After all, life is too short to let time go by for the sake of temporary gratification. And when Francis II returned the coin to him, all the discord between the brothers had been put aside. As a subject of the Austrian Empire, the heirs of Archduke Karol should have a good relationship with the emperor. Archduke Karol himself knew very well that the future emperor of Austria would most likely be Franz Joseph. Archduke Karol did not want his heirs to repeat his tragedy. After receiving Franz's letter inviting Friedrich to be a guest, he immediately sent someone to kidnap his third son back from the navy. The singing of birds, the blooming flowers on the neatly manicured lawns, and the majestic Arc de Triomphe could not interest Archduke Friedrich. To be honest, since his mother's death, his only entertainment activities were discussing battles with the whole family, or designing his own ships. Archduke Friedrich, who was walking while thinking with his head down, collided with a towering mountain peak. Due to the high speed of the opponent, Friedrich was knocked to pieces and was a little annoyed. He just looked up and saw an elf with long golden hair. This was a bit too exciting for Friedrich, who had not seen a woman in the navy for several months. A fountain of blood gushes out. Chapter 87, No Regrets, will be released tomorrow. I hope I can be like boxing champion Rayo and say I have no regrets about this book at the end. Chapter 88, Encounter. Friedrich's nosebleed spurted wildly, and then he fell on his back, which really scared Thalia. She felt that she was not running fast today, and it was obviously the other person who hit her. How could it be so serious? Could it be that there were internal injuries like Franz said? Thalia stepped forward and held Friedrich's head, using a handkerchief to stop his nosebleed. You okay? Thalia asked, while secretly thinking displeasedly, how could a grown man touch her so uncontrollably? Friedrich had not been in such close contact with women since his mother's death. He entered the military academy when he was very young, then the artillery academy, the naval academy, and then the navy. There were almost no women in these places. The women that this young man usually sees are all dressed more conservatively and solemnly. Those women can hardly speak to men. Their hands and feet are tightly wrapped, and even their hair is covered with hats. Friedrich had never seen this kind of half-exposure palace attire in the northern hemisphere before, which was really too exciting for him. Logically speaking, Thalia was only wearing a skirt that was very common in upper-class social interactions. However, Friedrich hated upper-class social interactions. He was half social, so how could he have seen such a revealing outfit? Thalia's long, disheveled hair made Friedrich even more imaginative. In fact, most women in this era usually looked like Friedrich when they went out. However, women with a higher status in the court preferred to wear palace clothes or formal clothes. As for Talia's long hair, the reason is more because she finds it troublesome to wear curly hair, and at the same time, letting it go makes her feel freer and more comfortable than wearing a hat. Franz also thinks that Talia is more suitable for long hair. After all, not every woman is suitable for hairstyle. In addition, Thalia is indeed a beauty. Taking all the factors together, it is not surprising that Friedrich would have a nosebleed. Friedrich lay in Thalia's arms, intoxicated by the other's caress, letting the other person poke his nostrils with a handkerchief, acting obediently like a cat that had been caught with its neck stretched out. Seeing that the boy's nosebleed had stopped, Thalia helped him up and then touched the boy's head. "Sister, I still have something to do. I'm sorry this time. I'll treat you to coffee next time." Thalia didn't know Friedrich, but she knew his major uniform and his age. Thalia could easily tell that the boy who bumped into her was a child of a noble family or an officer of the Imperial Guard who had been concealed by his ancestors. Now she has more important things to do, but she doesn't have time to take care of the children, although she is also doing things for the children. Archduke Friedrich, who was watching Thalia leave, didn't think so. He felt that the other party must want to invite him to drink coffee. After it was clear that no one was around, Friedrich took out the bloody handkerchief and smelled it vigorously. Then he happily continued along the path towards his destination, thinking about the next encounter. He even thought about two children, a boy and a girl, and their names. Soon they met again. Friedrich was tying a scarf on a child, and the two seemed very close. Friedrich immediately held his head and went crazy. Could she have a child? The steward of the royal garden on the side wanted to come forward to greet him, but seeing that Archduke Friedrich was acting a little rude, he coughed twice. Friedrich was a little absent-minded, and the garden steward had already begun to introduce him. "Archduke Franz, this is Archduke Friedrich Ferdinand Leopold. You should call him uncle." "Hello, Uncle Friedrich. I heard that you are the youngest genius in the history of the Austrian Imperial Navy. I have always wanted to meet you," Franz said. "Archduke Friedrich, this is Franz Joseph, the eldest son of Archduke Franz Karol." The garden steward continued to introduce. "Hello, Franz. Do you want to play hide and seek or go on the swing? But I suggest you play with your own peers. I'm not only your uncle, but also an officer of the Empire. I also want to serve the Empire. No time is wasted on meaningless games." Facing Friedrich's cold words, Franz really didn't expect that he had met Archduke Karol's eldest son, Archduke Albrecht, before. Although he was tall and powerful, he was easy to get along with. At least he wasn't as aggressive as this. But Franz soon followed Friedrich's gaze and discovered something was wrong. He was not looking at himself, but at Thalia. At this time, the garden steward also noticed that something was wrong in the atmosphere and immediately stepped forward to smooth things over. "The two of you probably haven't had lunch yet, so why not chat while eating?" The garden steward snapped his fingers, and a servant immediately brought desserts and fruit wine. Thalia also wanted to lighten the atmosphere. She didn't expect that the person she knocked down was an archduke. He looked very angry and had to find a way to remedy the situation. Yes. According to the latest scientific research, people are more likely to be aggressive when they are hungry. At this time, Thalia found that Franz was also looking at her with questioning and reproach in his eyes. Thalia had no choice but to lower her head and pick up the coffee pot next to her. She first poured a cup of coffee for Franz and then walked to Friedrich. In a sense, Thalia fulfilled her previous promise. "Mrs. Sophie, thank you for the coffee." Friedrich said very solemnly. Franz has a lot of dark streaks in his head. This guy thinks of Thalia as his mother, but this is even weirder. The garden steward immediately ran to Archduke Friedrich and whispered in his ear, "This is Archduke Franz's tutor, Miss Thalia, not Mrs. Sophie." Friedrich's expression changed several times, first shocked, then ecstatic, and finally facing Franz with a dark face, as if he wanted to fight Franz. The situation was very awkward for a time, and Thalia quickly stepped aside. Although Franz didn't know what was going on, 99% of the look on Thalia's face had something to do with her. This kind of woman who had not received any systematic palace education was prone to getting into trouble. It was no wonder that he hadn't seen that beautiful woman yet. Misogyny. In fact, Franz really wanted to reply, "You are an officer of the Empire, and so am I. You are a major, and I'm still a colonel," but Franz didn't do this. He decided to use his trump card to end this meaningless farce. Franz hooked his fingers, and Thalia naturally understood what he meant. She took out a box and opened it on the table. Inside was a model of a ship. When Friedrich saw the ship model, his eyes immediately lit up like a later glue guy, and he started playing with it carefully. But he quickly returned to his previous stinky face and said coldly, "This steam battleship of yours doesn't even have a paddle wheel. Do you want to use a steam engine to drive the blower to blow the sails?" Then he rushed towards Thalia with a smiling face, and Thalia could only smile awkwardly. The first chapter was released. I don't know the rule of releasing it at 12 o'clock. I originally planned to post it at night. Sorry. Thanks for the support. Thank you. Thanks to the book friend Alcoilo for the reward and the monthly tickets of Stupid to Chickson, Iron Sana, book friend 2020081300000430, almost first, and Zianatang 246, and the support of all the readers. We are very close to the second node that will change the fate of the Austrian Empire, and Archduke Friedrich is one of the key pieces. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 89. No quarrel, no acquaintance. The disadvantages of the paddle wheel are too obvious. They are bulky, inefficient, and easily damaged. What's more terrible is that as a warship, the weakness of the paddle wheel is too easy for opponents to seize. Franz said, "Inefficient? Isn't it much faster than paddling?" Such continuous and stable power is exactly what people have been pursuing for thousands of years. How come it turns into bulky and inefficient waste in your mouth? Friedrich retorted, "Thalia." Franz called. Franz had known that it would not be so easy to convince the other party, so he prepared a large fish tank in advance. The two maids cleared a space on the table, and then Thalia placed the glass fish tank on it, filled it with water, and took out two model ships with paddle wheels, and placed them on it. The first boat is a fixed paddle wheel. Its paddle wheels are on both sides. It is characterized by a simple structure and easy maintenance. The disadvantage is that the efficiency is too low. The paddle presses the water when it enters the water, and lifts the water before it comes out of the water. Therefore, most of the energy is wasted, so its diameter is often made very large, and the depth of entry into the water generally does not exceed 1/2 of the radius. After that, Thalia filled up the legal regulations on the boat model, and put the boat into the lake in front of the Arc de Triomphe. The boat traveled 15 meters, and stopped. As a glue guy, Friedrich was very excited to see the wind-up boat moving in the lake. He had never seen such a delicate toy and couldn't help but feel envious. Can it not be exquisite? Franz found more than a dozen experts, and took a month to build it. In fact, the craftsmanship is not that complicated, but these experts feel that it should be perfect. They even sent the boat to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna for polishing. Franz did not continue to take care of the first boat, but asked the servants to row out to fetch it. Thalia took out the second boat and put it into the water. The paddle wheel of this small boat was at the stern, and was a movable paddle wheel, mobile. Paddle wheel. Its paddle is connected to the wheel body in a hinged manner and performs compound motion through eccentricity because its paddle can enter and exit the water at a suitable angle, which improves efficiency. The thrust generated by the movable paddle wheel is slightly inferior to the fixed paddle wheel, but it is better in that it consumes less power and is more durable. Failure filled the second boat with wind and put it into the water. Although the speed of the boat was not as fast as the previous one, it sailed a total of 25 meters before stopping. Friedrich was still very disdainful. After all, he had systematically studied shipbuilding knowledge. The shortcomings of this movable paddle wheel were too obvious, that is, it was too exposed and difficult to repair. There was no need for the opponent to use cannons at all, as long as there were a few an unlucky crew member could jam it if he fell into the water, and he really doesn't think that a ship without a paddle wheel can be better than a ship with a paddle wheel. Now the mainstream development direction of steamships in the world is paddle wheels. Is the whole world wrong? Franz picked up the third boat and pointed to a fan-shaped object at the rear. Friedrich also noticed this small device just now, but did not think of its use. It should be some kind of auxiliary power device, but the direction is wrong. If it is to provide forward power, its fan blades should not separate to the left and right, but should be one in tandem, or a circular paddle wheel is suitable, so as to provide forward power. Franz handed the ship model to Thalia, who filled the clockwork and put it into the lake. The boat sailed 40 meters before stopping. Friedrich stood up in surprise and wanted to jump into the lake to see what happened. Fortunately, Thalia grabbed the belt and escaped an untimely death. The Habsburg family is really similar to the Zhu family of the Ming dynasty. Archduke Karol and his son both fell into the water and died. Archduke Friedrich fell into the water and drowned, and Archduke Karol fell into the water and died of pneumonia. Returning to his seat, Friedrich carefully studied the design of the third ship and finally asked reluctantly, "What is this spiral object?" "Propeller." Franz replied calmly. "What? A great name. It's really powerful. Can you tell me why?" Friedrich asked, putting away his previous arrogance. In fact, Friedrich also disliked the design of paddle wheels very much. The reason why there are no giant paddle wheel warships in the world is not that the technology is not up to par, but that there are too many problems and the weaknesses are too obvious. The mainstream strategy in this era is to grab the T, occupy a superior position, and then fire from the side point, and that huge paddle wheel is undoubtedly the easiest target to destroy. Once a paddle wheel battleship loses its paddle wheel, it will be no different from an ordinary battleship, or even a burden. Miss Thalia, please explain to Grand Duke Friedrich. Franz was a little brat in Friedrich's eyes, but in Franz's eyes he also felt that Friedrich was a brat. The kid should find someone he can easily accept. Thalia's IQ was not bad. After asking Doppler to do some physics knowledge, she understood the working principle of the propeller. Grand Duke Friedrich, many processes in physics are reversible. A windmill can be blown by water, which in turn can blow out wind. Where the flow speed is high, the pressure is low. When the propeller rotates, a flow speed difference will be formed, thus generating pressure. It creates momentum, Thalia explained while fiddling with the propeller on the ship model. The slender fingers and his favorite ship model were a perfect match, and Friedrich was almost drunk. Friedrich immediately recognized that this design would transform the Austrian Empire and even the laws of naval warfare. Perhaps a new era is coming, an era dominated by 10,000-ton giant ships, an era with speeds exceeding 20 knots. In fact, this was Friedrich's fantasy. It was not until 1858 that the first 10,000-ton ship was launched. This is really a genius design. With this technology, our Austrian Empire will definitely be able to surpass Spain and Sardinia. If the French cannot follow up in time, they will also be defeated by us. France, you must do this. This technology is kept secret. Actually, this technology was invented by a British engineer, but he has not applied for a patent yet. If you want, you can grab his patent rights. Franz replied calmly, damn. British guys. How can there be so many geniuses in that barren place? When will we catch up with the British Navy? Friedrich accidentally said his true words: a soldier who does not want to be a general is not a good soldier, and a marshal who also does not want to compete with the British cannot build a truly powerful fleet. Don't worry, they don't have a commander as good as you, nor do they have the courage to embrace new things. Franz said. In fact, the British Navy debated the propeller internally for nearly 20 years before reaching a final conclusion. As long as Austria does not use propellers on a large scale in civilian industry, the British will not care too much. Thank you for your compliment. At this time, Archduke Friedrich really recognized Franz. This was the first time he had seen someone who was younger than him, smarter, more far-sighted, and more ambitious. See, come on, you really lost. I hope my little toy can be helpful to your naval reform. I would like to remind you that the Egyptians are expanding their arms and preparing for war. They are not satisfied with the Treaty of Cutahaya. In order to maintain the dignity of the great power, the Austrian Empire, a navy is a must. Friedrich knew the power of the Egyptian navy and also understood that the current situation of the Austrian navy was not enough to cope with the crisis. He hesitated and said, "Franz, you are a true descendant of the Habsburg family. Compared with you, I'm really insignificant. I have a merciless request." Franz couldn't adapt to Friedrich's sudden formality, but he still spoke. "If I can, I will definitely help." Friedrich took courage and said, "I would like to hire Miss Thalia as a special advisor to our navy." Chapter 90. Our goal is. Franz was speechless for a while. It seemed that the hero had a hard time being a beauty. Franz looked at Thalia and saw Thalia's head shaking like a rattle. Franz originally wanted to tell Friedrich that Thalia was going to be the president of the Royal Academy for Women in Vienna, but he did not want to consider such a thing for the time being. But then I thought about it. Wouldn't this be a target again? The kid opposite clearly regards me as a competitor. If I speak for Thalia again, I'm afraid that this kid's misunderstanding will be deepened. Although it may be a bit cruel, Thalia must face it on her own, and Franz does not have much energy to devote to her. As long as Miss Thalia agrees, she is free to stay or leave after her term ends. Franz kicked the ball back to Thalia. Thalia herself did not yearn for aristocratic marriage, and even scorned the aristocracy's view of love. She did not want to be anyone's lover. She would rather be the principal than be the lover of a nobleman. Thalia understood what Franz meant, which was to give her the opportunity to make her own choice, while also giving both parties a cooling off period to think. Franz's approach was very rational and considerate, and there was nothing wrong with it, except that Thalia felt a little disappointed in her heart. Friedrich looked at Thalia expectantly, and Thalia responded with a very standard smile, but she didn't look at him. Friedrich was not a man who loved his children. He quickly got into the role and brought the topic to the conflict between Turkey and Egypt. "Franz, you said that the Egyptians are expanding their military and preparing for war and are ready to take action. Why didn't the Empire's intelligence department notice it? I'm also a naval staff officer after all, but there is no news at all. Could it be that Count Tyrrell deliberately concealed it?" Franz shook his head. The Treaty of Cutahaya allowed Egypt to obtain a large area of Ottoman Empire territory, but Ali Pasha still had to surrender to the Ottoman Sultan and had to pay symbolic taxes every year. At the same time, the Ottoman Sultan always regarded it as a shame and always wanted to take revenge on Egypt. In short, in a word, the Treaty of Cutahaya is not a peace agreement, but an armistice agreement, and the deadline is when one of the parties feels that the time is ripe. Friedrich knew the contents of the Treaty of Cutahaya, but this treaty was signed at the urging of the 5 major European powers. Do Egypt and the Ottomans really have the courage to challenge the order set by the Europeans? Does anyone really dare to break the order? Don't they know the consequences? But now Britain, France, and Russia all have their own agendas. The French are now flirting with the Egyptians. The Egyptians received their technology from the French. At the same time, France is also the largest financial backer of the Ali government in Egypt. The Russians are busy appropriating the legacy of the Ottoman Empire. As long as the Egyptians do not touch the Russian bottom line, they would like the Egyptians to continue to weaken the Ottoman Empire. Only Britain wanted to keep the Ottoman Empire intact in order to maximize its own interests, but in this way Britain would have conflicts with Russia, France, and Egypt. Will we in Prussia really pay a huge price for the Near East problem? Theoretically, the Egyptians have the opportunity to take advantage of the conflicts and interest distribution issues among European countries to fish in troubled waters. However, historically, the European powers did not give the Egyptians a chance and directly united to impose sanctions on Egypt, completely withdrawing Egypt from the historical stage of competition for hegemony. But, France, you know that our Austrian Empire has almost no interests in Egypt and West Asia. Why do we want to get involved in this kind of thing? Friedrich asked. But, the Austrian Empire is the maker and defender of order. If the Austrian Empire retreats, then of course the empire's face may be lost, and even its original status may be deprived. Franz replied, but this is just your guess, or your wishful thinking. Even if you are the future heir to the throne, if I send what you said to the Ministry of War, I'm afraid I will only be laughed at, as you said. This is just a child's guess on my part, but I can give you some data. These are all documents from Prime Minister Metternich's office. Thalia took out a box and opened it, which contained a thick stack of documents. The Egyptian government has taken tough economic measures, controlling 95% of export goods and 40% of imported goods. Among them, the trade volume of cotton has increased 256 times compared with before the last war. This alone can provide the Egyptian government with annual earnings of nearly £1 million. The Egyptians built their own arsenal in Cairo, using technology that the French had eliminated, and could produce 4 cannons and 700 rifles every month. The total strength of the Egyptians is as high as 210,000, and they are trained by French instructors. In terms of the Navy, 2 large shipyards can add considerable combat power to the Egyptian Navy every year, and have purchased dozens of warships in France, and their strength has far exceeded that of the past. What shocked Friedrich most was that there were actually 9 first-class battleships under construction in the Alexandria shipyard in Egypt. There is an element of exaggeration in this, because most of the battleships sold by the French to the Egyptians were scrapped and refitted. The Egyptians' shipbuilding technology was not up to paragraph. The first-class battleships they built were equivalent to the level of European third-class battleships. Just reading the report, Friedrich's palms were filled with sweat. After all, according to naval intelligence, the Egyptian ships were mainly light gunboats and sloops. What Friedrich didn't know was that the naval intelligence he was seeing had been compiled 10 years earlier. Perhaps it was due to the huge contrast between before and after. Friedrich's hands were shaking a little at this time. Franz was also thinking about whether he had gone too far in modifying Prime Minister Metternich's government report. After all, the real strength of his opponent was far greater than previously expected. At this moment Friedrich laughed loudly and tapped the information in his hand. Interesting. If we can block the Egyptian Navy in their dock and annihilate them all, then our Navy of the Austrian Empire will definitely become famous. As expected, a man is not rude in vain. In just a few minutes, Friedrich not only decided to eliminate the Egyptian Navy, but also formulated a set of tactics for this purpose, and even envisioned the battle process and results. If the existing naval ships of the Austrian Empire are modified, how soon will it take to achieve combat effectiveness? Franz suddenly asked. 1 to 3 months. The modification is not difficult, but the soldiers need to be familiar with the operation. The Austrian Imperial Navy has always been insufficient in military expenditures. Many departments of the Navy usually have no personnel, and they only hire them in times of war. Friedrich explained. So, how long does it take to gather the troops needed for an ocean battle? Ocean combat? Since its establishment, the Austrian Imperial Navy has never conducted a true ocean voyage. What? Are you scared? Such a clumsy method of provoking generals. Do you think it will be useful to me? What do you mean? Where is the enemy? Is it Mexico? The Mexican rebels, with the support of the United States, blocked the ports of the Mexican government forces. Mexico asked France for help, but was rejected. The vice president of Tanzania smuggled to Vienna on a small boat, asked for help from the Austrian Empire, and asked to see Archduke Karol. However, it was ruthlessly delayed by the Regency Council. Count Korolov supported helping the Mexican government forces fight the rebels, while Metternich opposed intervening in Mexican affairs. After all, the Austrian Empire did not have enough troops and financial resources to fight for others. "No, it's Zenler," Franz replied. Chapter 91 Meat Grinder Contest Part 1. Zenler? I heard that the Ministry of War has trade relations with Chenla. Is it because the people of Chenla are unwilling to pay? Friedrich asked with some confusion. Chenla was too far away from Austria, and the transactions between the War Department and Chenla were kept secret. If Friedrich hadn't discovered that the War Department had used naval barges, he wouldn't have known about it. No, I think they have sent all their money, but the Church's fleet was warned by the Vietnamese government. There is a private territory in Kampong Sombe belonging to Ambrosius, which was obtained from the Chenla government obtained legally. Now that the Vietnamese have taken control of Chenla, they do not intend to recognize the legitimacy of this territory, and are even preparing to expel the parishioners on it. Since last year, 2 battles have broken out. At the end of 1835, the Vietnamese gave up their plan to establish the eldest daughter of Amson as king of Chenla, because the eldest princess rejected the good intention of Emperor Minh of Vietnam, and did not marry the son of Emperor Minh. The Vietnamese turned to support the more cowardly An Mui as queen of Chenla. The next year, the Vietnamese prepared to send the Chenla royal family to Zengxi city. At the same time, they appointed 3 Khmer spies, Chalang, Renai and Luo Jian, to control Chenla. The imperial court was prepared to completely eradicate the forces loyal to the Chenla royal family. Officials Kim Phan, Perisu, and the commander of the Forbidden Army, Hong Bufu, led their troops to launch an uprising in order to survive. Unfortunately, they were betrayed by spies. Vietnamese General Giang Minh Kyo sent troops to suppress the uprising, and the uprising army fled south to Kampong Som. When an uprising broke out in the city, Ambrosius was still indulged in games with several princesses. Although Princess An Mui has become the queen of Chenla in name, she still lives a leisurely confinement life with her sisters in the royal palace in Phnom Penh. The Vietnamese were busy measuring the land in Chenla and eliminating the resistance forces. Even the Khmer spies and nominally peaceful ministers were too lazy to show off. However, the desperate efforts of Guan Jinping, Palaisu and others pushed Ambrosius into the center of the storm. Phnom Penh Royal Palace, Leng Palace Royal Garden. Ambrosius still didn't know the danger was approaching, and was playing hide and seek with the princesses, when suddenly a little eunuch broke into the garden. It's not good. It's not good. Mr. Ambrosius, you should hide quickly. General Giang Minh Kyo has sent people to take the princesses away. Don't let them see you. If they see you, he'll be dead. The young eunuch is a close confidant of the eunuch surnamed Li, and the eunuch surnamed Li is also the good half-brother of the official Jinpan. His words are absolutely trustworthy. The 4 princesses all looked panicked, because ministers loyal to Chenla had been instilling in them the idea that the Vietnamese would kill them to avoid future troubles. However, their dignity as a royal family made them refuse to escape, and instead opened a secret passage in the palace to allow Ambrosius to escape. When Ambrosius saw several girls who were looking forward to death, his blood surged up for a moment, and he drew his pistol and prepared to fight for his dignity. The little eunuch said hurriedly, "Mr. Ambrosius, they won't do anything to the princesses, but they will definitely kill you, because Lord Guan Jinping and the others rebelled, and it is only a matter of time before General Giang Ming's army destroys them. Run away." Ambrosius wanted the princesses to escape with him, but the princesses refused, because the education they had received since childhood did not allow them to escape in battle. After weighing the pros and cons, Ambrosius jumped into the secret passage resolutely. However, there were already Vietnamese soldiers waiting at the exit of the secret passage. It seems that these Vietnamese soldiers do not know the location of the secret passage exit. Who betrayed the princesses? It was definitely not the little eunuch, because they were still together just now, which meant that the other party had already known about the existence of this secret passage. Ambrosius let out a sigh of relief. It would be better if he was betrayed by the people around him. Although the Vietnamese officers and soldiers have not yet found the location of the secret passage exit, it is only a matter of time. Ambrosius felt that he could not be inferior to several women. He chose to run away just now, because there was still hope of living. It was not worth losing his life for this. But now that there is no way out, it is time to show his courage. Ambrosius looked at his two old-fashioned revolvers and patiently loaded the primers. This old-fashioned revolver requires pressing the hammer to reload after each shot, and then pulling the trigger to achieve continuous shooting. Ambrosius seized the opportunity, rushed out of the hole, fired 6 times in succession, and after killing 3 Vietnamese soldiers, threw away the first revolver in his hand and took out the second revolver. The Vietnamese officers and soldiers who were killed with 3 people in an instant were briefly confused, but they were not timid. Instead, they rushed towards Ambrosius excitedly, as if they saw a bag of gold. Ambrosius killed 2 more Vietnamese soldiers with his pistol, then pulled out his swift sword and continued fighting. After stabbing the 2 Vietnamese soldiers down, he suffered a heavy blow to the head and lost consciousness. When Ambrosius woke up again, a general wearing crimson robes was sitting in front of him, playing with his pistol in his hand. "Who are you?" Ambrosius moved his hands and found that his hands behind his back were tied tightly and he could not break free by himself. He felt a little pain in his head, probably from the blow to his head before. His knees seemed to be injured and his ribs hurt when he took a deep breath, but overall it was not a big problem. As soon as he heard the other party's question, Ambrosius felt that there was still hope. Guan Jinping and the others had not revealed their identities yet. He did not want to be captured as a hostage and become the opponent's bargaining chip. Rather than that, it would be better to die gloriously. Ambrosius answered carefully, wanting to see the other person's reaction. "I am an Austrian businessman." "What are you doing in the palace?" the general in the crimson robe continued to ask. "Only generals of 2nd rank or above, and civil servants of 3rd rank or above in Vietnam, can wear crimson robes. There is no doubt that the other party is Zhang Mingdao, the governor of Zenla." Ambrosius lowered his head and pretended to be submissive. "I am the tutor of Her Royal Highness the Princess Zhang." Mingjiao suddenly said sharply, "You lied." "I have not," replied Ambrosius. Suddenly the general in crimson robe held down Ambrosius' head and put the muzzle of the gun against his temple. Ambrosius closed his eyes and waited for death. "Biu biu." The general in crimson official robe laughed wildly. "You are a bit brave. You are worthy of being a warrior who killed 8 people. But I want to ask you, why did you kill them? If someone forced you with a knife, would you wait to die?" Ambrosius asked. The general in crimson robes kicked Ambrosius in the stomach, and Ambrosius fell to the ground in pain. "Don't be disrespectful. If you look at me like that again, I will gouge your eyes out. To tell you the truth, I, Zhang Mingjiao, have heard your story and admire you very much. I heard that you still have 20 a very loyal servant." Ambrosius pretended to be surprised, but in fact he was relieved. It turned out that Franz had already made arrangements and asked Ambrosius to separate his guards to avoid being blamed. Ambrosius had a total of 50 people in Phnom Penh, but for safety reasons, he did not let everyone live together. Normal communication relied on letters and secret whistles. Ambrosius usually stayed with a group of 20 people and another group of 30 people pretending to be French merchants doing business in the city of Phnom Penh. However, what Ambrosius doesn't know is that there is a group of weird Catholic Zenla and Vietnamese who are also secretly protecting Ambrosius. This group of people was specially arranged by Archbishop Prussia. This was what Franz meant, because Franz felt that no matter how Westerners disguised themselves, they would attract the attention of the Vietnamese. As long as the other party paid a little attention, it would not be difficult to see through the disguise. Similarly, even if you find a team of Zenla people to face a local snake, it will be easy to see through, but when there is an obvious flaw, the less obvious flaw will be much easier to hide. As for why not to tell Ambrosius, of course it was to keep it secret. Only secrets that even the parties involved do not know are the most difficult to discover. Please, let them go. They have nothing to do with this matter. Ambrosius had his hands tied and only had to stand up with his head. "I said I admire you very much, but if you killed my people, how should I explain it to my brothers?" Zhang Ming said, "The person you want to kill is me. My country will redeem my body. If you kill everyone, you will not get the money." Ambrosius replied, "Money? You Austrians and Frenchmen are all a bunch of mediocre people who only know money. I, Emperor Minh of Vietnam, have gathered an army of 150,000 and will one day break through the Zenon Pass and unify the Central Plains. By then you Western barbarians will not even be qualified to be our slaves, but I'm very gracious now. I can play a game with you and your people. If you can win, I will not only let you go, but also recognize your merchant status. From now on, you will be my merchants in David Point. However, if you fail, you will die, and your corpses will be turned into nourishment on this land. Outside Phnom Penh, an abandoned ancient temple. Point Ambrosius was taken to an abandoned ancient temple. At a glance, he saw that the Astartes monks from the church and several officers sent by the Austrian army to protect him were there, and even the weapons were there. Point on top of the pagoda, you can have a panoramic view of the entire ancient temple. Zhang Mingdao's deputy general shouted, "Welcome to the Temple of No Return, where you will face 1,000 vicious prisoners. The winner will be pardoned, while the loser will stay here forever." Ambrosius and his party did not answer, but were just checking their equipment silently. Captain Balafon suggested that he kill the murderous devil with one shot. Point, but Ambrosius shook his head. On the way just now, he saw purgatory on earth. The whole city was burning. Soldiers slaughtered house to house, and even pulled women into carriages and tortured them. He felt that he had to do something. For this he must live. Can we leave alive if we win? Ambrosius shouted in Vietnamese. Of course, I swear to Buddha, Zhang Ming said with a smile. Chapter 92 Meat Grinder Contest. We cannot serve God and Mammon at the same time. Everything Satan promises is within the principle of Mammon. Father Sartor said. Point Ambrosius nodded and continued counting weapons while saying, maybe, a lot of innocent people will die. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to cry, and a time to laugh. It comes from the New Testament of the Bible. Grand Duke Ambrosius, you don't have to worry about it. Follow your heart. That is God's arrangement. Father Sartor said. Ambrosius was startled. He did not expect that the exorcist had a personality like a confessor. The Vietnamese don't look down on us. All our weapons are here. A total of 70 long guns, 20 single-shot pistols, 10 revolvers, and 2,000 rounds of bullets. In short, the luggage and goods we brought are all here. They didn't seem to care at all what we had. Point according to the Vietnamese, there are 1,000 opponents against us, but no one can guarantee that the devil will fulfill his promise. We have to find a way to escape. Point. When I came here just now, I noticed that there is a river next to this temple. Judging from the direction and flow rate, it should be the Basha River. As long as we follow the river south, we can return to Phnom Penh. There are merchant ships of French church friends there. I hope they are still alive. At this time, the door of the temple was opened, and a large group of thin, frightened people were driven in by the Vietnamese army. Point. Some of them were prisoners who had made mistakes, some were Chinla people who opposed Vietnamese rule, and some were just because they could not pay the rent. There were men and women, old and young, but most of them were half-closed. Point. What Ambrosius and others saw in front of them was not a vicious prisoner, but looked more like a group of poor beggars. The whips in the hands of the Vietnamese officers and soldiers kept dancing, and the crowd moved slowly. Point. Said a small leader of the Vietnamese army. You despicable Khmers, prisoners. Now Mr. Zhang Ming will give you a chance. As long as you can kill all the Western barbarians in front of you, you will be free. At this time, a tall and thin man in the crowd said, but they have guns in their hands. The little boss kicked down a box, which was full of sticks. These are your weapons. The tall and thin man wanted to say anything, but the little leader pulled him out of the crowd and chopped off his head with a knife. Whoever dares to talk too much should do the same as him and hurry up. After all, there were 1,000 prisoners, while Ambrosius had only 21. Point. At the beginning, there were a few desperate people in the crowd who broke away from the team and ran forward. However, before they could run far, gunfire rang out from the opposite side. Point. Sympathy is sympathy. These people want to kill Ambrosius and his party. They will not sit down and wait for death. Point. At this time, Westerners were obsessed with self-confidence. The story of 168 Spanish people fighting against 80,000 Inca natives and winning a complete victory was widely circulated. The United States also massacred Indians with few casualties. The prisoners who ran at the front fell to the ground, and those behind immediately turned around and ran back. Point at this time, the Vietnamese officers and soldiers holding the battle behind also raised their muskets and fired randomly at the people running back. There was a scream from the crowd, and the living people continued to move forward. Point Ambrosius and his men's shots were accurate and deadly, but the enemy was outnumbered. Point seeing the crowd approaching Ambrosius and his party, Zhang Mingyao felt extremely happy. He hugged Queen and Mary next to him, and pointed to the battlefield below. Your little lover is about to be torn apart by your subjects. How about it? It's interesting. Hahaha. Although Zhang Mingyao is the second-rank general of Vietnam and the actual controller of Zenla, he is not satisfied. He wants to break the soil and become the king. Just like Wu Sangui, he is willing to conquer Siam in the west. Be a pink-seeking. Point this woman, and Mary, was an important step for him to obtain royal status. He didn't want to end up like King Hepingzi, who was ruined and died. Point Zhang Mingyao felt that by marrying Queen Zenla, he could legitimately take over everything in Zenla, and he could also help Emperor Mingming get rid of the serious troubles he had before the northern expedition. Point and the white man named Ambrosius in front of him must die, because Zhang Mingyao can see that the queen and her sisters have a good impression of this man. And he must not let this foreigner continue to approach the queen and her sisters. However, Zhang Mingyao still underestimated the shamelessness of the white people. Queen Anmei was already pregnant with Ambrosius's child. Point of course, Queen Anmei also has selfish motives. She hopes that someone can bring powerful reinforcement to save her country. She has had enough of relying on others. What Queen Anmei didn't know was that before she became queen, Ambrosius had made many bets. Round after round of volleys caused heavy casualties to the prisoners advancing in dense formation, and their flesh and blood bodies seemed so fragile in front of the bullets. Those prisoners who were directly killed by rifles were lucky, but those whose hands and feet were broken, or those who clutched their stomachs and wailed on the ground, were not so lucky. They were soon trampled to death by the waves of people attacking from behind. Point in the eyes of the fanatics of the church, the lives of pagans are not lives at all. Brother Sata knocked down a charging prisoner with a hammer, sprinkled a handful of white phosphorus on his face, and recited a spell. Point the exorcist carries white phosphorus, and it is normal to use white phosphorus. Brother Sata's physical and mental attack made the surrounding prisoners afraid to step forward. Point as a grenade as big as a landmine exploded in the crowd, the prisoners collapsed and fled frantically toward the gate. However, waiting for them were the muskets and machetes of the Vietnamese army. Go back. You bunch of untouchables can't even make your master happy. In fact, Ambrosius and his team did not kill many prisoners, probably only 1/10 of the prisoners. However, this kind of team has no morale at all. They all follow the leader. Once the leader dies, the crowd will. It's chaos. The battle just now made Ambrosius see a turning point, and he immediately went to look for the box containing white phosphorus. White phosphorus was a good material for making smoke bombs, as Franz said. He didn't expect these exorcists to bring this. It was really very helpful. Zhang Mingyao, who was sitting on the pagoda, was not in a hurry. Your Majesty the Queen, a good show is about to take place. When a person's fear reaches its limit, even a musket cannot stop it. The team of prisoners once again attacked Ambrosius and his party. This time Ambrosius and others did not raise their guns and shoot, but took out some bottles containing white powder. The prisoners were hesitant at first, but after hearing gunshots behind them, they plucked up the courage to charge forward. However, when these people rushed forward, the bottles that were thrown fell to the ground and exploded violently, igniting flames, followed by billowing smoke. The temporary smoke bomb made of white phosphorus was extremely effective, because it was the first time for the Vietnamese to use this kind of thing. Many people thought it was a foreign monk who had cast a magic spell and cowered away. Even the Vietnamese officers and soldiers behind them became afraid. People's fear of firearms is not as good as their fear of the unknown, because people's fear of the unknown is rooted deep in their blood. However, before the prisoners could escape, white smoke enveloped them. Not only them, but also the entire temple of no return. Gunshots continued to be heard in the smoke, accompanied by the screams of the crowd. Princess Anmo's heart was already in her throat. She silently prayed in her heart that Ambrosius could survive. For this reason, she was willing to believe in any god she didn't know. Zhang Mingyao frowned, because he also heard the soldiers coughing. It must not be poisonous smoke, Zhang Mingyao thought, but fortunately he was high enough that he couldn't smell it. The soldiers of the Vietnamese army below thought the same way and avoided the choking smoke. When the smoke dissipated, the door was open. Most of the Vietnamese officers and soldiers at the door were lying on the ground, but Ambrosius and his party disappeared out of thin air. The prisoners in the temple could no longer restrain their fear when they saw the door open. Rushed towards the door. Princess Mei was thanking the gods and Buddhas in the sky, while Zhang Mingyao kicked a Buddha statue down and yelled at the bewildered Vietnamese officers and soldiers below, "Why don't you chase after me?" In order to avoid the suspicion that the word count is too high, let me explain it here. The exorcist carries white phosphorus, and its use is routine. Chapter 93. Plan A is cancelled. Schönbrunn Palace, Royal Gardens. Friedrich shook his head and said that he did not know the country cousin named Ambrosius and had no interest in attacking the natives of Southeast Asia. Franz wanted to persuade him again, but Friedrich seemed determined. If the Austrian navy couldn't be asked to help, then the church would have to rely on it. But teaching is a double-edged sword. The more you use it, the more dependent you become on it. If you are really determined to solve the church's problems, you will either endure the pain of digging out the flesh and scraping the bones, or spend dozens or even hundreds of years eroding its influence. So, what are your plans? Franz asked. Of course it will be an armed escort to Mexico. Count Tyrrell is worried about this matter. Count Tiller will probably be very happy then, because the equipment sold to Mexico will bring him one step closer to his plan. Of course Franz knew Count Tyrrell's plan, but in Franz's eyes, the plan was stupid and meaningless, because the Austrian army wants to update the M1831 front-loading musket. Although it is the latest musket, it does not have a very obvious improvement in firepower and other aspects. The M1831 front-loading musket is better made than the musket produced in Austria in the last century. The ignition method has changed from firing to firing. The caliber is larger, the barrel length is longer, and the power is larger than before. It also has an advantage when bayoneting. In fact, in 1836, Dresser completed the design of a needle gun that loaded ammunition from the back. At that time, rifles were loaded from the muzzle, and loading ammunition from the back was a very rebellious practice. However, the Prussian government recognized the superiority of the rifle and immediately acquired the invention. The government took over everything and classified it as a secret, developing it under secrecy. Franz also wrote anonymously to the military to remind him of the huge advantages of breech-loading guns. However, in the eyes of senior military officials, this was completely nonsense. Breech-loading guns are too expensive, have many hidden dangers, and are not easy to repair. The most important thing is the way of loading from the breech, which is not very elegant. One general even quipped that a nobleman should eat with his mouth, not his butt, and the same goes for guns. In fact, breech-loading guns have appeared for a long time, and the earliest one should be the Ferguson rifle. This Ferguson is not the manager of Manchester United, but the protagonist of the text "The Shot Not Fired." He once spared Washington, the first president of the United States. Washington is not called the father of the founding of the United States here, because I only recognize Louis XVI as the father of the founding of the United States. However, the American snipers did not let him go, and Ferguson and his Ferguson rifle became history. In fact, the real reason why the Ferguson rifle was buried was not Captain Ferguson, but its excessive price. The cost of £150 made many nobles prohibitive. The other is the Hall rifle, that Americans are proud of. It is said that this rifle has a range of up to 1,200 meters. Can shoot up to 10 times per minute, and can shoot a 1-cent coin from 500 meters away. Of course, this is just American folklore. After all, the above mentioned performance is comparable to the rifles of World War II. In history, a group of rangers equipped with Hall rifles were wiped out while driving away Indians. In the book, American volunteers equipped with Hall rifles were pinned to the ground and hammered by the Mexicans. In fact, the Hall rifle has a fatal flaw, which is a serious lack of airtightness. This kind of rifle is vividly called mud-faced. Since black powder was used at that time, a large amount of residue would be produced every time it was burned. If it is not cleaned up, shooting this rifle 3 to 4 times may cause the powder chamber to leak. The remnants of black powder were sprayed directly into the soldier's face, and in serious cases it might even explode the barrel point. Another characteristic of insufficient airtightness is that the thrust is very poor. Even if the weight of gunpowder is increased, it can only reach 1/3 of the power of an ordinary rifle. On the battlefield, long-distance shooting often fails to penetrate the board or hit the same person. The embarrassing situation of being shot several times and still not dying. The M1826 smoothbore cannon is very useful, but the cost is a bit high. I can understand if you want to go to Mexico, but Prime Minister Metternich is opposed to getting involved in the Mexican Civil War. Franz said, "Oh, this is simple. The Navy can formulate a drill plan. After all, the Austrian Navy has never conducted an ocean voyage before. I think Prince Metternich should also know the importance of the Navy in this era to a country." Friedrich Nozomi replied. Franz still wanted to persuade him again and said, "Prince, Metternich will not allow you to take the Navy to the warring countries. We should consider building new warships in Trieste. The Americas are so big, and it's not just Mexico. It will be easy to change the route when the time comes. As for the new warships, you don't have to worry. I have a group of great technicians who can build anything I want. Of course, I will stay in Trieste for a month and then leave once my plans are on track." Friedrich understood the importance of new battleships, but he also wanted to practice military training. After all, he still did not know the true strength of the Austrian Navy. At the same time, he was also preparing for the major event that Franz said might change the fate of the Austrian Empire. Theoretically, the Mexican Navy poses no threat to the Austrian naval fleet, but in this era of sea navigation, bad weather, disease, and even pirates may take lives, and there are too many uncertainties in naval battles. Lanz could only continue to remind, "You must be more careful. If possible, it is best not to engage in meaningless battles. Your mission this time is just to deliver goods. The Austrian Imperial Navy is still waiting for you to flourish. This is a rare opportunity for actual combat. How could I give up?" According to intelligence, the Mexicans don't even have a battleship, only light gunboats left by the Spanish. Friedrich said, "Your intelligence may be wrong, and our Austrian Empire's navy seems to have no battleships capable of long voyages, only some cruisers and frigates." Franz replied, "Oh, dear Franz. You may not know much about the Navy. How difficult it is to use a light gunboat to sink a frigate." Friedrich seemed nonchalant. At this time, the high explosive artillery shells known as ship killers had not yet been born. Everyone in the sea battle was still in the stage of throwing iron balls at each other, and the big ships undoubtedly had a huge advantage. In fact, Friedrich's judgment was indeed correct. The Mexican Navy's light gunboats were a joke when facing the Austrian cruisers, but at this time the Austrian cruisers were also a joke in front of the British main battleships. Afterwards, Franz discussed the European situation and army construction with Friedrich, and the afternoon passed in the blink of an eye. Franz invited Friedrich to dinner, but Friedrich refused. He was busy going home and drawing plans for the battleship. Friedrich glanced at Thalia when he left, but Thalia pretended to clear the tableau on the table and avoided Friedrich's sight. After Friedrich left, Franz stared at Thalia. "Look what I do. Are there flies on my face?" Thalia asked. "You usually don't take care of your own food, and you still order servants. What's wrong today?" Thalia was annoyed by Franz's teasing, but she couldn't get angry in front of others, so she smiled and said, "Archduke Franz, exercise is good for your health. Okay, then come with me for a walk," Franz said. Chapter 94. 2 or 3 Small Things. Vienna, Royal Garden. The two walked aimlessly in the Royal Gardens, Franz in front and Thalia following behind him. The 4 seasons in Schönbrunn Palace do not change much. Even in winter, there are flowers in bloom, but the types of flowers have changed. The evening breeze was blowing, and although it was a little cool, it was very comfortable. Franz liked this feeling very much. Franz wanted to find a place to rest for a while. He thought a sunny lawn would be good. When he was about to lie down, Thalia suddenly ran up and sat down next to Franz obediently, letting Franz's head rest on her lap. Of course Franz did not refuse, but was just curious about what Thalia was thinking. Thalia was actually a little scared. After all, sharing mistresses was not uncommon among nobles in this era, let alone her as a tutor. What's more, she has lost her noble status and now owes Madame Sophie a large sum of money. It would not be surprising if she was given away as a slave point, and looking at Franz's performance just now, she didn't seem to care much about her appearance, and a trace of unreasonable panic came to her heart, although she didn't know why she and I suddenly felt this inexplicable. Has anything happened recently? Franz asked. As usual. Thalia replied with a sigh of relief. Recently, the Polish Zionist army in Vienna seems to have restrained itself a lot. No, it is not so much that it has restrained. It is better to say that it has completely disappeared. Disappeared? Completely? Franz asked. Yes, those Polish soldiers who were active in the tavern and cafe are gone. Not even a trace can be found. Thalia answered. Franz showed a pleased expression, and Thalia found it strange and asked, isn't this good? Aren't we going to drive them out of Vienna? Franz shook his head. It will definitely take some effort, but what makes me happy is that these people seem to have finally discovered that they are an underground organization. They show themselves to the public like before. Except for fools, which underground organization would do this? If you can't find a clue, you can't. Is it like an underground organization? Thalia pinched Franz, and Franz knocked Thalia's hand away. What are you up to? I thought you had some unknown hobby. No, I'm just happy because I met an equally matched opponent. In fact, the Polish Restoration Army's forces in Vienna had been jointly strangled by the men of Prince Metternich and Count Korolaf. Except for the Violet Knights, who were already under the control of Madame Sophie, all traces of other members of the Polish Restoration Army were wiped out. Concerning the matter of the Polish Nationalist Army, you continue to keep an eye on it. If you really can't find any clues, can you hire some private detectives? Are there any other matters? Franz said. Well, a big thing. What? The Jewish administration in Vienna has arrested a big shot. Franz immediately thought about the artists who had recently come to Vienna. The Jewish administration loved to rip off these foreign artists. Which great artist is it? You thought wrong. It's Solomon Rothschild. This is strange. Wasn't the Jewish administration created by Solomon to deal with competitors? How come their boss was arrested? Yes, there is something more interesting. Guess who ordered the arrest? It's impossible that Metternich was drunk and just confused his old friend and arrested him, right? The two of them are wearing the same pants. Isn't Solomon the supporter behind Metternich? That's Prince Metternich. I heard that Solomon got into trouble with a big shot this time. To be honest, although Solomon thought very highly of himself, the pseudo-historians made him look like a god. But in fact, Franz could not count with both hands and feet the number of people who could manipulate Solomon in Vienna in this era. But the most likely person is probably his mother, Mrs. Sophie. After all, the great nobles of this era usually care about their own status, and generally do not care about those with lower status. But Mrs. Sophie is different. To put it harshly, it can even be described as a retribution. Moreover, Mrs. Sophie is involved in many industries and cares about more things. Solomon may not even know how he got involved. But Franz still guessed wrong. It's the Russian Crown Prince and Grand Duke Karol. Thalia liked to see Franz deflated, especially today. Franz scratched his head. He really couldn't figure out how Solomon Rothschild got into trouble with these two people. What happened recently surprised Franz and made him a little crazy. This feeling was very bad. Franz increasingly felt the need to establish an intelligence agency of his own. Vienna, Caesar Hotel. The director of the Jewish administration had a smile as big as a chrysanthemum. Your Majesty Solomon, I'm really troubling you today, but in name we are still Austrian officials, and we still have to act according to the orders of the Prime Minister. Solomon Rothschild suddenly looked at the director with sharp eyes. The director immediately knew that he had said the wrong thing and quickly closed his mouth. Call me Mr. Solomon. Solomon's tone was calm. I don't dare. Before the director could finish his words, a porcelain plate hit him on the head. He managed not to fall down, and did not dare to wipe the blood from his forehead with his hands. Call me Mr. Solomon. Solomon's tone was still calm. Yes, Mr. Solomon. Solomon took a sip of the coffee handed to him by the servant and said, "Give him some money and let him see the wound on his forehead." The director took the money and wanted to leave this place of right and wrong quickly. He was also ordered to do things. He couldn't afford to offend Solomon, nor could he offend the Russian Crown Prince and Grand Duke Carol. But the Russian Crown Prince and Archduke Carol will leave sooner or later, and King Solomon will always be in Vienna. What's more, the position of director was also given by Solomon, so how can I dare to disobey him? Solomon seemed to have thought of something and said, "Return." The director trotted back quickly. "How long am I going to stay here?" 3 months. The director whispered, "Oh, then starting from tomorrow, you will live in the bureau, and are not allowed to come out for 3 months. Do you hear me?" Solomon Rothschild said, "It's Mr. Solomon." The director could only admit that he was unlucky. Who asked him to fine Solomon 200,000 florins? But then again, these punishment terms were set by Solomon Rothschild. It was just to punish his competitors at the time, but he didn't expect that things would turn around and now he would be using it on himself instead. In fact, regarding intelligence organizations, Solomon Rothschild had one in Vienna. The Vienna Business Alliance is a financial intelligence organization that Solomon has run for many years. Although it is loose, its ability to collect intelligence and its influence are not bad. Solomon's recent misadventures have brought his reputation to its lowest point. Coupled with the 3-month confinement period, although he is still in his hometown of Caesar Hotel, his influence is no longer there. Chapter 95. Take a nap. In fact, there are still several ready-made intelligence organizations in the Austrian Empire. The first is the notorious secret police, and the second is a church. The secret police was naturally in the hands of Prince Metternich. This was a very strange organization, with a large number and bloated organization, inefficiency and no loyalty at all. This reminded Franz of the 800,000 forbidden troops of the Song dynasty. Although the secret police is divided into many factions, which gives Franz room to operate, it also makes the problem more complicated. At the same time, the possibility of adulteration and leakage of intelligence also greatly increases. Before being able to eliminate the factions in the secret police, Franz had no intention of using this organization. As for the church, it is still a common problem. Over-reliance on the church is like drinking poison. To quench thirst. Cultivate yourself. This is even more nonsense, not to mention that Franz himself does not know how to obtain intelligence. Where do the personnel come from? How do the intelligence come in? How long does it take? 1 or 2 years or 10 or 8 years? Recently, Franz had a new friend, Edward Taffy, the eldest son of the Taffy family, who came to study with him. It's just that what Franz has learned has completely exceeded Taffy's knowledge. And he has been in a state of confusion recently. Taffy prefers to get close to herself than to study. She likes to give Franz some snacks, toys and other things when she has nothing to do. Until one day Taffy saw Franz's toy and drooled with envy. No boy can resist the temptation of toy guns and toy cars, so Franz generously gave them to Taffy. After all, these toys cost little. Wind-up toy cars and pneumatic toy guns are definitely the top toys in this era. Although Taffy has seen real rifles and carriages, seeing them and playing with them are completely different concepts. According to Taffy himself, there was an organization similar to the Vienna Business League in his family. However, the scale was not comparable to that of Solomon Rothschild's Vienna Commercial Alliance, and its headquarters was in Moravia. Due to the distance, it was of little help to Franz. However, there was one thing that concerned Franz very much, and that was that the Taffy family ran the largest steamship company in Austria, and also had its own steamship factory. Franz was thinking that maybe Friedrich could get in touch with the Taff family, and maybe he could speed up the production of steam battleships at the same time. It can also draw the Taff family to the empire. Local powerful people like the Taff family can easily have the idea of confronting the central government. In fact, Franz was overly worried. Historically, this family had sharpened its head and moved closer to the royal family. In 1848, the Taffy family raised their own military expenses to help suppress the rebellion in Moravia. Taffy's father had a leg broken in Bohemia. In 1866, 2 of Taffy's uncles died in Sadowa. Later, Taffy became the Prime Minister of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and his brother became the Archbishop of Vienna. Both of them were staunch royalists. During World War I, Taffy's grandson died defending Lviv, a border city in Galicia. His son committed suicide after the defeat of Austria-Hungary. From the perspective of the Habsburg family, it can be said that they are full of loyalists. Perhaps it is the best choice to seize this opportunity when Solomon's control is weakest and turn his Vienna business alliance into his own intelligence organization. After all, Vienna does not need two emperors, and now is a good time to take advantage of his illness and kill him. Once Solomon loses the Vienna business alliance as an informant, Solomon will be like a blind man in Austria from now on. He can only rely on his brothers, Rothschild family, and family resources, which greatly reduces his threat. It's just that controlling the Vienna business alliance is not a simple matter, but who should be let go? He didn't have anyone available at all. Franz's father did have such a person, but it was difficult to convince him to work for him. As the sun set, Franz felt a little sleepy, so he lay on Thalia's lap and fell asleep. Thalia actually still had a lot of things to report, but Franz was already asleep, and she didn't want to disturb him for fear of annoying others. Thalia patted her cheek. She couldn't figure out what she was thinking. At this time, she would usually choose to do it first. Thalia lifted her hair and lightly pressed Franz's forehead. Schönbrunn Palace, Royal Greenhouse. The steward in charge of managing the greenhouse was a little troubled, because only 96 of the 10,000 rubber tree seeds given to him by Grand Master Franz finally became seedlings, which was less than 1%. The greenhouse steward even considered adding some similar saplings to get through it, but he gave up in the end, because Archduke Franz was a very shrewd little man, and it was not easy to fool him. Easily punished by Lady Sophie. The rubber saplings will soon be shipped to Trieste, where they will be boarded, and sent to Chenla, where they will thrive. In Madame Sophie's bedroom, Madame Sophie was helping Ajani fasten her bra. Women's clothing during this period was very cumbersome, especially corsets, which women could not put on themselves without help. The original intention of a corset design is to move the flesh to where it should go to highlight the charm of women. That is to say, the fat on the waist and abdomen is pushed up and down to achieve the effect of breast enlargement, hip lift and waist reduction. But in fact, this thing is similar to a torture device for women. For example, in Pirates of the Caribbean, the heroine was strangled by a bra until she fainted. This situation abounds. It is customary to choose a solid pillar or porch to support her center of gravity. However, at this time, Ajani seemed to have no object strong enough to support herself, not even a pillar, so she could only rely on clenching her fists. Borrow strength. Misses. Sophie was gradually increasing the strength on her hands. Ajani bit her lips tightly, and fine beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. I'll leave my hard work to you. You won't let me down, right? Mrs. Sophie said. No, Madam Sophie. I will serve Archduke Franz wholeheartedly. Ajani said with difficulty. That would be great. Let's have a drink to celebrate you becoming my son's esquire, said Lady Sophie. The maid then brought 2 wine glasses. The filled wine was illuminated by the white and transparent glass in candlelight, and its blood red luster was highlighted even more vividly. Ajani tremblingly picked up the wine glass and drank it all in one gulp. However, she almost vomited it out, because she tightened her abdomen too tightly, so she had to swallow it. Mrs. Sophie smiled, let go of the rope in her hand, and elegantly picked up the wine glass, and took a sip. It's too embarrassing. Practice 10 more times, Mrs. Sophie even stretched out her slender fingers, lifted Ajana's chin, and looked at Ajana's face carefully. What a beauty. But don't you guys have any men in Poland? Don't have any other thoughts? I will watch you. If you do well, I can let you meet your husband and let you fly away. Go to a place where no one knows you and live your good life. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 96 Drinking. Mr. Ravel has been troubled recently. As the Vice President of Mexico, he had to come to Vienna alone to seek help from the mysterious Archduke Franz Carol. This also starts with the Battle of Texas. As a southern Mexican general, General Joseph stabbed Tazanana in the back and besieged Mexico City at a critical moment in the US-Mexican War. Ruvel habitually ran away, abandoned the Mexican capital, and was scolded by Tazanana after joining him in the North Point because the French took the opportunity to refuse to pay the remainder of the purchase of Texas, claiming that it would only be given to the true ruler of Mexico Point as a result. The French bought the entire Texas for 33 million francs, and Tazanana had no choice but to admit defeat. After all, the Civil War was not over yet, and it was really not a wise move to offend the French again. In fact, Tazanana's army was much stronger than Josepila's rebels. At first, they took Mexico City with overwhelming force, but the situation of the battle soon changed. That is, the rebels suddenly seemed to have their eyes opened, and they were everywhere. Can predict the enemy's opportunity. All of Tazanana's plans seemed to be in the hands of the rebels, so Tazanana lost a lot of troops, but it was not enough to close the gap between the two. At this time, the Mexican Navy suddenly rebelled, blocked Mexico's sea lanes, and shipped a large amount of equipment and materials to the rebels, turning the war situation once again to the unfavorable side of Tazanana. After some investigation, all the contradictions pointed to the United States. It was the Americans who planned Epula's rebellion, the Americans who instigated the Mexican Navy, and the Americans who took advantage of the Mexican Civil War to make a lot of money. Americans are using Mexican blood to fill the wounds caused by the economic crisis. The Mexicans will certainly not sit back and watch their own demise. While they continue to fight the rebels, they also seek help from Europe. At the same time as the Epula uprising, Britain, France and the United States severed diplomatic relations with Mexico. Obviously, a strong Mexico is not in the interests of the three countries. The only ones Tazanana could turn to were Spain and Austria. Although he drove the Spanish away with the Mexicans, it was not impossible to invite the suzerain country back. The Queen Regent of Spain is debauched but not absurd. She can accept Mexico's return to Spain and is willing to let Tazanana's treason be forgotten, but she will not send a single soldier to Mexico. Tazanana tore into pieces the letters involving the Queen, and then he thought of Archduke Franz Karol again. In fact, Tazanana's first thought was Archduke Franz Karol, but he had to give up due to the weakness of the Austrian Empire's maritime power. But now he can't do much about the people who are in urgent need of treatment. Vice President Ruvel came to Vienna alone on his order to save Mexico from the fire. In fact, Ruvel didn't pay much attention to the position of vice president. He was originally supposed to be a messenger who shuttled between battlefields, but he became vice president only after his superiors rewarded him with a meal. This narrow escape attempt was just a return to his old life for him. It has been almost a month since Ruvel arrived in Vienna. He has met Prince Metternich and Count Korolov. Neither of the two powerful men in power has any interest in Mexico as an ally. Ruvel proposed that he could use the silver mines belonging to the rebel family as collateral, which caught the attention of Count Korolov, but because he had been busy wrangling with Prince Metternich, he had not responded to Ruvel for a long time. Of course, this is a gamble, where one's own life and reputation are used as a bet. If it fails, the outcome is either being hit by a carriage or shot to death by a guard, or being taken away by the gendarmerie and interrogated strictly. But Ruvel was lucky. He was not beaten to death by the guards and then thrown into the gendarmerie. Ruvel stopped the carriage, and just as he was about to shout, a cavalryman put a noose around his neck. As soon as the two guards restrained him, Franz Karol opened the car window. Call him over. The two guards brought Ruvel in front of Archduke Franz Karol. Your name is Ruvel. Ruvel's mouth was tied with a rope, and he could only nod with his eyes widened. Can you drink alcohol? Ruvel was a little confused, but nodded anyway. Great, my son said that a man from Ruvel will come to drink with me tonight. Sure enough, you came. Franz Karol said to the guards. Let him go. Lord Summerlet, the aide-de-camp to Archduke Franz Karol, asked in a low voice. Are you sure? Sure. Okay. Lord Summerlet summoned two guards and asked them to search Ruvel's body carefully. Even his hair, mouth, and socks were not left behind. Ruvel entered the carriage and sat opposite Archduke Franz Karol. Lord Summerlet also got into the carriage and sat down next to Archduke Franz Karol. Then another strong guard without weapons sat on Ruvel's side. Weir's side point. The strong guard and Lord Samorat stared at Ruvel with cold eyes, which even reminded him of the negotiation with the Aztecus. But Ruvel calmed down quickly, and he took a deep breath, and was about to speak. What? Are you drinking? Archduke Franz Karol. Last point. Ruvel scratched his head in embarrassment. I tequila. A Mexican friend gave it to me last time. You will definitely like it. It's cool and spicy, but a little bitter. After saying that, Archduke Franz Karol poured a full glass for Ruvel. Archduke Franz Karol, I'm here to ask for help on behalf of President Tazanana. The Republic of Mexico has suffered a shameless betrayal, and we need Austria's help. Archduke Franz Karol was minding his own business, drank the contents of the cup in one gulp, and poured himself a second cup. Seeing that Ruvel hadn't finished the drink yet, he seemed a little unhappy. Ruvel had no choice but to drink the wine in one gulp. The alcohol content of this kind of wine was not low, and normally one would not drink it like this. However, seeing that Archduke Franz Karol did not seem to have any intention of stopping, Ruvel had no choice but to do something like this. Follow suit. Archduke Franz Karol poured Ruvel another glass, and then drank his own glass in one gulp. After 3 consecutive drinks, the bottle of wine was already empty. 3 consecutive drinks made Ruvel, a soldier, a little unbearable. Moreover, he had been under a lot of mental stress recently, and had not eaten well, so he got drunk very quickly. Archduke Franz Karol brought out a second bottle of wine and a whole ham to entertain Ruvel. Ruvel didn't know how much he drank that night. When he got up, he found himself lying in a clean bedroom. His luggage and belongings were neatly placed in the corner. There was a list on the table and a wine list. The bottle is pressed. 50,000 rifles. 50 4-pounder cannons, 100 6-pounder cannons, 70 8-pounder cannons, 100,000 military uniforms, 20,000 pairs of military boots, and 600 tons of flour. After reading it, Ruvel burst into tears, unscrewed the bottle of wine, and drank heavily. Thank you to book friend Syundang Baffen for your award and monthly tickets for Janhua Janyu, Rootless Wind and Long Burning Green Lantern. Thank you for your support. Chapter 97. Thank you so much. Vienna, Royal Garden. Franz felt his forehead was wet, as if someone was licking him. There was warm breath all around, and the feeling of hair brushing across his cheeks. Franz closed his eyes, thinking about what happened. Just when Franz was thinking hard, he suddenly heard Mrs. Sophie's voice. Franz, stop licking, you will become stupid. At this time, Franz opened his eyes and saw the Bernese mountain dog raised by Mrs. Sophie licking him. Seeing that Franz was awake, Franz screamed excitedly twice and ran back to Mrs. Sophie. Mother, could you please give the dog and me a different name? Okay, the next one is called Maximilian. Mrs. Sophie replied. Franz was speechless for a while, seeing that it was already dark and there was no trace of Thalia anywhere. Ah. You looking for Thalia? Yes, I went for a walk with her today. That poor girl. Franz frowned. Did something bad happen in the palace? What's wrong with her? Mother, she's hungry and has gone to eat. Franz was even more speechless. Can you finish speaking in one breath, madam? Sophie walked up to Franz, opened her fan, and covered her mouth. Is this the way you talk to me? Then he pinched Franz's ears and walked towards his carriage. In the carriage, Madame Sophie threw Franz a list. Franz, you are very filial. You know that the products of your mother's clothing factory are not selling well, and the flour you have hoarded is almost rotting in the warehouse. Tell me, what else do you know? Mother, the military uniforms produced by clothing factories cannot be sold. No one would sell military uniforms in peacetime. You can't make money from things that can't be sold. The entire European agriculture is having a bumper harvest, but you are hoarding flour. I think you must have heard the story that drought brings money to boats and water brings money to cars, and by analogy, you feel that it is right to hoard food during the harvest point, but you have to act according to your ability. You have mortgaged all your and my father's properties. If I don't help you sell them, I think you will go bankrupt. Strictly speaking, I don't think you have any talent for business, Franz said seriously, cleverly avoiding the question of what else he knew. Mrs. Sophie was a little angry, but what Franz said was true. If Franz hadn't helped her deal with this crisis, their family would have been discredited. But Mrs. Sophie had already laid out a big game of chess. When she finished the game, she realized that she had no money, so she had to rack her brains to make money, but she did not have this talent. But it was still humiliating to be ridiculed by his son. Anyway, there was no one else in the carriage, so he simply grabbed Franz's face and pulled him to both sides. Then, I should also thank you, Franz. I don't think it's a ladylike thing to bully a kid with violence, so what should we do? If our children don't obey the rules, then you should enlighten them with reason. Mrs. Sophie and Franz had a good exchange of physics. Franz, was it really your idea to sell those goods to the Mexicans? Yes. Franz had no intention of lying, because Mrs. Sophie seemed to have known about it for a long time. You must feel that, before Franz finished speaking, he was interrupted by Mrs. Sophie. I'm very happy, Franz, you are my best son. Maybe your father's IQ has been transferred to you, but no matter what, you will definitely revitalize this family in the future. Mrs. Sophie touched Franz's head and continued, do you know what they call mother, the only man in the Habsburg family? Franz replied, I don't like this title. This title should belong to you and your father. What I want to say is that if you have anything to discuss with me, I can help you. Franz narrowed his eyes and noticed something unusual. Mom, what did you mess up again? Well, I used all the grapes in your manor to make wine. Mrs. Sophie said, just some grapes. Well, the grapes in your manor are not in good quality, and the wine you make is rancid. Mrs. Sophie added. Franz frowned. Mother, did you steal the grapes from my manor to make wine and ask me to pay you for the unfinished wine? No, I actually sent all that wine to your wine cellar. Franz was speechless for a while. You then? All the wine in your cellar went bad. Mrs. Sophie said apologetically. You are such a good mother. Do you know the value of those wines? Franz's wine cellar actually once belonged to Prince Elthazi. After his death, Franz II left a will and gave Franz the wines he had collected for many years, including many fine products. Together these are worth over 1.5 million florins. Franz, after reading so many books, do you think there is any way to save those spoiled wines? No, it can't be saved. Just wait and throw it away. February 1, 1837. Osaka. Due to successive years of poor harvests in the Osaka area, food prices have skyrocketed, and starvation is everywhere. Out of sympathy for the lower class people, and for the future of the Edo shogunate, Oshio Hihachiro, a Confucian scholar of Yomoi Shinsho school, petitioned the town for orders to open warehouses to release grain and provide relief to the victims. However, the town ignored this, and even took advantage of the famine to collude with businessmen to raise food prices to make huge profits and embezzle farmers' land. As a Japanese fan of Yang Ming's philosophy, he has well practiced Yang Ming's unity of knowledge and action. After several requests for orders were rejected, Oshio Hihachiro gathered his comrade disciples and decided to defeat the superiors. However, due to being reported by the traitors, the uprising was forced to advance the cause of justice. Oshio Hihachiro's uprising was quickly suppressed, but then someone used his name to launch another uprising on an unprecedented scale. Countless hungry people and poor people poured into rural cities, robbed food, and killed officials. The town official who had repeatedly refused Oshio Hihachiro's request was hanged in the square in the center of the city together with several hoarding businessmen. The uprising quickly alerted the shogunate, who sent a large army to suppress it. The rebel army, which had only simple farm tools, was vulnerable to the shogunate army supported by the iron artillery team. Although the uprising was suppressed, it also sounded the alarm to the shogunate. At that time, Osaka was the center of Japan's economy and was known as the kitchen of the world. A starving people riot actually occurred, which proved that the shogunate's exploitation of the people had reached an intolerable level. Some people began to reform the tax system, hoping to eliminate unreasonable advance taxes and reduce the burden on farmers. To alleviate domestic conflicts, some people saw the power of mind learning, and the whole of Japan started a craze for learning mind learning. After that, a large number of people who will leave mark in Japanese history were born. Among them was the later Japanese Navy Admiral Togo Hihachiro. There were only 7 words on his waistband. I will bow my head and worship Hegemony for the rest of my life. Some of the rebels used the money they robbed to bribe Dutch businessmen and send them to Europe. At that time, Japan only allowed merchants from the Dutch, King Dynasty, and Portugal to trade in Japan. Chapter 98 Biscuits, Noodles, Macaroni, El Tehazi Manor. In the underground wine cellar, the deacon in charge of managing the wine cellar was rubbing his hands. Although he was very dissatisfied with the royal family's robbery of the Elthazi family's property, he did not choose to follow the down-and-out Prince Elthazi. After all, it was a good thing to take care of the wine cellar for the royal family. A nice job. Only this time, the wine cellar he was looking after suffered a lot of damage. Of course, that was Mrs. Sophie's fault and had nothing to do with him. But come to think of it, at least in front of this little master, I still have to behave. Is all the wine here ruined? Franz asked. Well, it turned sour a month ago, the deacon replied. A month? Yes, a month ago. Then, why didn't you report it? Because these wines have turned sour. It may be caused by the poor quality of wine sent by Madame Sophie. Maybe? I asked you why you didn't report it. Franz's tone became stern. He didn't expect that the butler in his manor was actually such a thing. He was looking after such an important wine cellar. He didn't know how the wine turned sour, and he didn't even know how it turned sour a month after it happened. Not reported. The deacon also noticed that something was wrong in the atmosphere, so he thought of an excuse. I thought Madame Sophie would tell you. Archduke Franz. What? A hopeless bastard. Franz commented in his mind. What's your name, sir? Gushen Casse. The deacon answered. Well, Mr. Cass, you are fired. Franz said flatly. Why? I have been working for this manor for 20 years. Gushen Casse said eagerly. Sir, please shut up, or I will take you to court. Franz said. Gushen Casse was still going to argue, but was stopped by Talia. Mr. Cass, you have caused such great losses to the Grand Duke. Not holding you accountable is already the greatest kindness to you. Please don't continue to challenge the Grand Duke's patience. Children's patience is very poor. Gushen Casse felt that he was not wrong, but he did not want to continue to anger Franz, because he felt that what Talia said was very reasonable. Children have poor patience. If he went to Mrs. Sophie, he would definitely be able to explain the matter clearly. Continue to stay in the manor and be your own deacon. Franz couldn't help but feel a little sad when he looked at the wines in the cellar. He didn't feel pity for the wines. He just felt that the wines were not sold at the value they deserved, and it was a pity for that. In fact, luxury goods like high-end wine are worthless if they are too much. So it's not that Franz doesn't want to take action, but that he can't take action. But who would have thought that there would be a fire in the backyard? Now it's better. Franz, what are you going to do? Thalia asked. What else can we do? Check it out. After distillation, the less sour wine is sold as cheap wine, while the more sour wine can only be sold as grapevine gar. Franz said with a bitter look on his face. Westerners will be jealous, whether materially or spiritually, and it has a long history. As for why Westerners know how to make vinegar, it's because there is really no technical content in it. Vinegar was first made by naturally fermenting wine and honey with honey. It is estimated that a drunkard in ancient times accidentally mixed the two things after drinking too much. Mixing them together revealed the presence of vinegar half an hour later. Franz, the assessment has been completed. After sorting just now, 1/3 of the wine can be distilled and sold at a low price, and the remaining 2/3 can only be made into grapevine gar. If it is sold by force, it will affect the royal family credibility. Okay. How much can it be sold for? Franz asked. Thalia blinked and gestured with 5 fingers. Only 50,000? Franz asked in disbelief. It's 5,000. Thalia answered. If you exclude the cost of processing and selling these grapes, I'm afraid the actual profit is only 4,500 florins. How is this possible? As he spoke, an unknown white soul-like object floated out of Franz's mouth. Thalia suddenly used the clip to knock the white object back into Franz's body. In recent years, except for Western Europe, where there has been a bumper harvest, the price of wine has plummeted. Now the price of wine is only 1/3 of what it was in 1830. The reason why the wine here can sell at high prices is because of the help of the Elphazy family. The reputation accumulated over hundreds of years. Franz understood what failure meant. If he didn't want to reap the benefits, he would accept the loss honestly. But this sudden disaster really made Franz very unhappy. However, failure's words also reminded Franz that the continuous bumper harvests in these years were abnormal. It was clear that Eastern Europe was prone to frequent natural and man-made disasters according to Franz's impression. This series of disasters included flooding in Poland and a rare storm in Hungary, which destroyed a large number of farmland and houses, including Pitofi's home, and refugees were everywhere for a while. Talia, how much money do we have now? Franz said suddenly. Let me take a look. Thalia rummaged through the folder and quickly stopped. 6,374,900 florins. Just exchange all the money for grain, grapes, or agricultural products. Franz said excitedly. Franz, are you crazy? Yesterday, you were sarcastic about your mother's overestimation of her abilities, so why are you so bad today? Thalia suspected that Franz might have intermittent neurosis, but it's no wonder. After all, it's a family disease. If you are asked to go, just go. Franz kept pushing Talia. He felt that there was no need to look at this wine cellar anymore. I'm sure within a year at most, there will be a famine in Eastern Europe. By then, the price of food will definitely skyrocket. Franz explained. What? If there is no famine within a year, the flour will go bad, and the shelf life of most agricultural products cannot exceed 1 year. Thalia asked. Then, make that flour into biscuits. Franz replied. Cookies? Thalia was a little confused, because in her mind, cookies were a very luxurious dessert point at this time. There were no biscuits in the modern sense in Austria. Austrian biscuits were said to be biscuits, but in fact they were more appropriately called cookies and cakes. Beat the eggs and mix them with fine flour. Add cookies and icing sugar, and after baking is completed, drizzle a layer of creamy chocolate on the outside point. That's right. Super expensive. Ah. You sure? Thalia continued. Franz thought that Thalia didn't understand the meaning of this, so he explained it carefully. 4. Can be stored for 1 year. When the flour is processed into biscuits, the physical properties of the flour changed into biscuits, so the shelf life continues to be extended, so it can be stored for another year. Thalia thinks this method is good, but the price of biscuits is a bit too expensive. Actually, you can consider making it into macaroni or noodles. This way the cost will be much lower, and it will be easier to sell to the poor. Thalia suggested. Franz didn't understand what Thalia was thinking. Why? The biscuits can be eaten directly without fire or water. They can even be sent to the army as dry food. What if you encounter an enemy while cooking macaroni? Surrender. I don't know why. When Thalia mentioned macaroni, it made Franz think of Italy. Seeing Thalia's insistence on noodles and macaroni, now Franz began to doubt Thalia's ethnic background and whether she had any Italian descent. Chapter 99. Carlos's counterattack. Carolist headquarters in the Pyrenees. Although the British Royal Navy escorted the French fleet to Texas as recently as 1836, the British attitude towards Spain was still tough. Britain secretly transported supplies and weapons to the Carlos faction from the sea. Palmerston was a representative of the hardliners and advocated a severe blow to Queen Regent Christina in northern Spain. The peace advocates in Britain also suggested using war to promote peace, but they did not recommend a head-on conflict with the French because Britain still needed French support on the Near East issue. There was a bottom line. Spain could not fall to France's side. As a former British Army Lieutenant General, John George Woodford once accompanied the Iron Duke Wellington to fight Napoleon in Spain. He liked this land very much because it had brought him countless glory and victory. At the same time, he was also very familiar with the tactics of the French and Spanish, and he formulated a plan. Woodford accepted the rank of Lieutenant General awarded by Carlos, and he decided to attack Lieutenant General Pierre's French corps first. In order to lure the main force of the Spanish government troops away, he sent 2 small troops out of the encirclement. Burning killing and looting all the way to the Bilbao area, destroying roads and bridges along the way, and spreading rumors that Bilbao was in danger at the same time. A second small force was used to set up an ambush on the road to harass the Spanish reinforcement in the rear. As soon as they heard the news that Bilbao was besieged, Espartero and Count Sabir immediately believed it, because according to their estimation, the Carolists' food supply had reached the limit, and they were definitely die. I just didn't expect that the other party would go to Bilbao to seek death. Now the task assigned to them by the Queen Regent to preserve their strength could not be completed. Their expedition almost emptied Bilbao. There was no army or food in the city, but there were tens of thousands of angry and hungry people. If these people all joined the Carolists, then the whole of Spain would be in turmoil again. The news of the Carolist siege of Bilbao made Lieutenant General Pierre breathe a sigh of relief. He decided to open a bottle of champagne to celebrate. Now he could finally relax and let the Spaniards bite the dogs and just watch the show. Not only do we not have to fight, but we can also complete the tasks assigned by the cabinet. Count Sabi led the cavalry vanguard to return for reinforcement, but was ambushed on the road. Count Sabi fell off his horse and was seriously injured. Once a commander is lost on the battlefield, it will be a heavy blow even to the regular army, let alone a miscellaneous army like the Spanish government army. Count Sabi's vanguard troops fought independently and in chaos, and some even surrendered to the Carolist guerrillas. This defeat soon became known as a disastrous defeat. After receiving the news, Espartero actually decided to take precautions step by step to prevent another sneak attack by the Carolists. Among the intelligence Espartero received, the information obtained was contradictory, fragmented, and difficult to distinguish between true and false. Some say there are 10,000 Carolists, some say there are 20,000 Carolists, and there is even information that the local militia has joined the Carolists. The Carolists have gathered 100,000 troops. This war is Carolist trap. After Count Sabi's troops were dispersed, Espartero's army in the rear stood still, and some people had evil thoughts. These defeated soldiers lied that they were Carolist rebels, burned, killed, and looted along the way, and even burned down the city in order to destroy evidence. For a time, the whole of northern Spain was full of smoke, and Carolist troops were everywhere. Of course, as you can imagine, not only the defeated soldiers, but also nearby bandits, and armed big landowners also joined in. Respectable gentlemen naturally don't want to rob the rabbits in their own village. After all, the rabbits don't eat the grass beside the nest, but the village next door is none of his business. The snowflake-like battle report was thrown on Espartero's desk, which made him even more unable to believe what he was seeing, but Bilbao had to save it. Ever since, a farce of 50,000 troops moving forward 500 meters every day began. Madrid Royal Palace. Queen Regent Christina looked at the secret message in her hand and a pile of battle reports on the table. She felt that she had been deceived by Morato. But she quietly handed over the secret message to the Liberal Prime Minister Otatur to show her trust in him. After Otatur received the letter, he cursed Morato as a conspirator and said that the Carolists would not die well. He was willing to go to the front line to personally supervise the battle. What the Queen Regent wants is Otatur's words. She is ready to send Otatur and his supporters to the front line. Spain does not need a prime minister, but it needs cannon fodder. French army camp in the Pyrenees. After several months of sit-in war, the French army had long become numb, not only unresponsive to the sounds in the mountains. Lieutenant General Woodford personally led his men to surround Lieutenant General Pierre's camp. This time the Carolists were mobilized in full force, with a total of nearly 30,000 troops. But what Woodford didn't expect was that the French had no defense at all, and allowed him to complete the encirclement so easily. The battle lasted all night. Although the French army was unprepared, and the commander was drunk, the combat effectiveness of the two sides was obviously not of the same level. The French army actually broke into pieces, and under the command of several colonels, they highlighted Woodford's encirclement. This made Woodford very angry. The French army in front of him was not an elite army at all, but this group of Spaniards was not an army at all. 30,000 against 10,000. It was a sneak attack at night. As a result, more than 3,000 people were lost. The French army only more than 2,000 people were lost, but the French army lost almost all supplies and heavy weapons, as well as their commanders. When Lieutenant General Pierre woke up and saw Woodford, He thought he had returned to the Napoleonic War, and that was the first thing he said. "You're old." This sentence made old Woodford burst into tears. He invited Lieutenant General Peer to have another drink, to sober up. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz looked at the biscuits served by Thalia and said, "This isn't a cookie, it's a cake. It's obviously biscuits." Thalia said, "Is this a palace practice? This is too extravagant." Franz said, "No, all pastry shops do it this way. That's why I asked you if it could be made into noodles or macaroni, and you actually said I'm Italian." Thalia was very dissatisfied. During this period, Italian civilization had declined, and the Italians were second-class citizens of the Austrian Empire. This made Thalia very unhappy. In fact, biscuits in the modern sense should have been invented in the 1850s. Biscuits at this time were a luxurious pastry in Vienna. The almonds and chocolate on them alone discouraged many poor people. Franz had no choice but to do it himself. Made some dough, threw it into the oven, and it was baked in a short time. Facing the black paste in front of her, Thalia was a little hard to accept, but she picked one up and tasted it and felt it was pretty good. It's fluffy and crispy and tastes delicious, but a little dry. Thalia commented, "Cookies, of course, although this biscuit cannot be used as pastry, it can still be used as rations for the poor." Chapter 100 Second Investment. Vienna, Grabenstrasse. This can be regarded as the busiest street in Austria. The attic of a watch shop on the corner is the home of Baron Bruck. As the second largest financial figure in the Austrian Empire and the former chief financial and tax advisor to the royal family, his home seemed a little shabby. The only furniture was an old single bed and a simple set of tables and chairs. There was a stuffed bookshelf in the corner, and 4 sets of clothes and 2 hats hung on the hangers at the door. Thalia felt uncomfortable stepping on the creaking floor, and the musty smell in the air made her cover her mouth and nose, but she respected Baron Bruck very much. After all, with Baron Bruck's status and identity, if he wanted to, just like Friedrich List, it would not be difficult to earn 1 million florins a year after the death of the old emperor. He could live an easy life, whether he joined the Metternich faction or the Korolov faction. Baron Bruck took the letter and walked to the window. The sunlight shone on the letter through the window. He took out a monocle from his coat pocket and stuck it in his eye socket. In this era, the way to wear monocles is to stick the lenses in the eye sockets. The disadvantage is that they can easily fall off if your expression is exaggerated. Nose pin monocles would not be accepted for another few decades. People of this era were not used to having glasses stuck on their noses, because that would not look noble enough. Baron Bruck was full of joy when he first received the letter, but soon he frowned, and his frown became even tighter after reading it for a while. "I don't doubt Archduke Franz Karol's investment vision, but I want to be sure, is this a decision made by Archduke Franz Karol himself, of course, without the authorization of Archduke Franz Karol? I would not have been able to hand over so much money to you, although 6.3 million florins was expected. Few people in Vienna could afford it. This money order from the Chartered Bank of the Austrian Empire could not be fake. But this made Baron Bruck more confused, because he knew the handwriting of Archduke Franz Karol, and the signature on this money order was obviously not his. There was only Franz on it, and the handwriting was so neat that it looked like it was written by a child of. Baron Bruck handed the letter and check in his hand back to Thalia. "Miss Thalia, I want you to know that the price of food in the empire has been declining for 6 consecutive years. In Hungary, the land is even deliberately abandoned to prevent food from rotting in the ground. The construction of the German customs union and railways had a great impact on Hungary, because the emergence of railways led to a decrease in transportation costs. In areas with developed transportation, Hungarian grain could not even compete with Prussian grain. The unsellable situation of grain that Prussia had expected did not happen. Instead, due to the decline in transportation costs, Prussia opened up more markets. For a time, the Junker landowners were in short supply of grain. The biggest contributors to this are the 3 South German countries. Bavaria itself is a piece of bad land. Although it is an agricultural country, its self-sufficiency rate is low, and it relies on imported food all year round. After the opening of the railway, Bavaria discovered a new business opportunity, which was to transfer the German region. The cheap grain was sold to the French at high prices. At this time, French agriculture was at its lowest point in history, and urban worker uprisings continued. Louis Philippe had to order relief for the poor. Although Thiers was dissatisfied with this, external France had to fight the Carolist counterattack in Spain and restore the glory of New France in North America. There would be no more trouble at home, so he had to accept using money to buy the poor. Peaceful Point Gizzard greatly appreciated this kind of tolerant policy. He felt that problems that could be solved with money were not problems. The economic situation of the Orleans dynasty was much better than that of the Bourbon dynasty, and this was also thanks to Gizzard, an outstanding man. Financial capitalist. Point. Although France's agriculture is currently in a slump, after decades of peace, France's trade has grown rapidly, coupled with the large amount of wealth plundered from the colonies, allowing the rich in France to live very well. He felt that, as long as the rich is, if a little bit of wealth is given to the poor, the crisis facing France can be solved. In fact, in the initial stage of the relief law, the French government tried to give money to the poor, but this approach caused prices to skyrocket, and finally had to give up. After all, the wool must come from the sheep. Later, the French government decided to collect taxes to purchase grain and provide relief to the poor in order not to be exploited by domestic grain merchants, and also to prevent the price of domestic grain from being too high and creating more people who could not afford bread. Gizzard came up with a good idea, which was to import grain from foreign countries, and South Germany was their first choice. First of all, during this period, grain prices in Germany were low due to the bumper harvest. Secondly, trade with the three southern German countries will help increase France's influence on the three southern German countries. From a historical perspective, the three southern German countries have been of great help to France. In particular, France has never given up its ambitions in the Rhine region. After the discovery of large amounts of iron and coal in the Rhine region, the French could not sleep at night. The home of Baron Brooke. Mr. Brooke, you have to know that the harvest goddess cannot always visit Austria. Thalia said, but, in the past 6 years, the corpses of businessmen with ideas like yours have been piled up in the Alps. Baron Brooke replied. Hoarding and price gouging have a long history. However, the abnormal weather has bankrupted countless businessmen who wanted to rely on hoarding, because the storage of grain has a shelf life, and beans usually only have a shelf life of about 2 years, and cannot be used when the new year is approaching. Not selling at a low price further depresses the market price. 6 years is enough time for many people to go bankrupt several times. Mr. Brooke, please rest assured, we have found a way to extend the storage time. Oh. How many years can it be extended? About a year. What? About a year from now, right? Now, both Mexico and Spain are in civil war. After the war, they will be devastated, and they will need our food. In the civil war between Mexico and Spain, it's hard to say who will win and who will lose. How do we know who to sell to? No matter who wins or loses, he needs food. Thalia handed the letter and check back to Baron Brooke. Baron Brooke did not refuse. After thinking for a moment, he signed his name and handed the power of attorney and the letter back to Thalia. Since it is the Grand Duke's order, I will implement it well, but I want to know what it means. To make the noise louder? Baron Brooke asked. What the Grand Duke means is to use your influence to prepare for this acquisition as much as possible to get as many people involved as possible. Thalia explained. But this is unreasonable. If there are more people purchasing, the price of food will rise, which will affect our income. This is not a wise move. Baron Brooke said, it's not a good thing for the individual, but it's a good thing for the country. The Grand Duke once said that it's about profit. Why? Thalia said, is it because of profit? Baron Brooke murmured, and couldn't help feeling that a person with such a broad mind and magnanimity was actually treated as a fool. However, Baron Brooke seemed to finally understand the logic of Archduke Franz Karol's behavior. He was a fool, so he had nothing to fear, and no need for logic. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.